Chapter 1196. Perhaps Dongqing Wudi's stiff expression was too obvious. Li Huaqing, who had been observing his emotional changes, directly misunderstood his meaning. He obviously didn't want to give Dongqing Wudi a chance to refuse. He had to protect Li Huangtu. It was important to win Dongqing Wudi's support. If Dongqing Wudi showed his support for Li Tianlan, then their next conversation would undoubtedly be much more difficult. We all understand the importance of the dark world. In recent years, the dark world has been very chaotic, and various influences have been reflected in all aspects. But this is also an opportunity for our Jianghu state. Li Huangtu's strength is obvious to all, and the foundation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital is also there. Their existence is very important to Jianghu state. Li Huaqing deliberated over his words and said word by word. He spoke very slowly, so he seemed particularly cautious. He suddenly smiled and continued, "Of course, the knot between him and Tianlan is something that needs to be considered. Jianghu state should be able to solve this problem. Whether we are willing to accept it or not, the fact is in front of us. For now, the former Li family no longer exists. What appears in front of us now is Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital. I'm going to find a chance to have a good talk with Li Huangtu and let him recognize the reality. Tianlan, Li Huangtu, even Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu, their existence has a certain contribution to Jianghu state. That's good. Now the dark world is chaotic, but they are standing at the top of the dark world. I hope they can look outside and try to reduce some unnecessary friction." His smile slowly faded and became solemn. "I will warn Li Huangtu, even Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. In the name of the parliament, I will ask them to maintain their respect for Tianlan in the future. Only by uniting can we have greater gains." "Do you think Tianlan will agree?" Dongqing Wudi took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a drag and asked slowly, "Tianlan is your son?" Li Huaqing smiled, his eyes shining. "You're wrong about one thing." Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, "Tianlan is indeed my son, but he left the family when he was a child. The Dongqing clan is now not qualified to ask him to do anything, let alone restrain him. Tianlan never owes anything to the Dongqing clan. On the contrary, we owe him too much." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time, then he twitched the corner of his mouth and said softly, "In any case, Jianghu state must protect Li Huangtu. Wudi, you and I have known each other for many years. You know me and the importance of Li Huangtu to Jianghu state. Considering all aspects, keeping Li Huangtu here is, to some extent, a kind of protection for Tianlan. I don't believe that you don't understand this truth." He picked up a piece of beef and said slowly and firmly, "Li Huangtu must stay." The words were not loud, but he was incomparably resolute. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Huaqing coldly and did not speak for a while. Li Huaqing expressed his attitude. From another angle, his meaning was also very obvious. That was, no matter what Dongqing Wudi thought, he had to protect Li Huangtu. If Dongqing Wudi supported his decision, everyone would be happy. If Dongqing Wudi refused, Li Huaqing would do the same. After all, he was the president of Jianghu state. If he really insisted on protecting Li Huangtu, who really dared to touch him? If Li Tianlan really killed him in a rage, there would be no place for Emperor Dong's palace in the whole of Jianghu state. If Li Tianlan was rational and did not kill Li Huangtu, but also did not let him go, then Jianghu state would inevitably take corresponding measures to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace. Economic assistance in all aspects, public opinion propaganda in multiple channels, resource support in various fields, armament support. There was no doubt about the strength of Emperor Dong's palace now. But after all, the development time was a little short. They were far from reaching the level where they could still develop rapidly after leaving Jianghu state. The foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was indeed in Tiannan, but Li Tianlan's foundation was in Jianghu state. If Jianghu state really made up its mind to cut off all support for Emperor Dong's palace, with the financial support of the Flourishing Age Fund, Emperor Dong's palace would not disappear, but it would inevitably lose the opportunity for the fastest development. They would either be in a deadlock without pain or itch, or they would leave Jianghu state completely. What Li Huaqing and Guo Wenyan said was actually right. With Li Tianlan's current status, if he left Jianghu state, Star State, European Alliance, Snow Country, East Island, and many other countries would desperately come to recruit Li Tianlan to join them. As long as Li Tianlan was willing, they would be willing to kneel down and lick his boots. An absolutely invincible expert in the dark world could not be measured by some resources and money. It was no exaggeration to say that the current Li Tianlan was already a super heavyweight who could determine the fate of a superpower for decades to come. But if they really chose this way, Only Li Tianlan and a small number of people in Emperor Dong's palace would leave Jianghu state. Jianghu state could not allow this to happen, which was tantamount to real treason. Under the fury of the parliament, the entire Emperor Dong's palace would be completely destroyed even if it could not leave Shenyuan city. This was the worst ending, which was not what Li Huaqing wanted to see, nor was it what Emperor Dong's palace was willing to bear. But even if it didn't go to this step, Jianghu state would suppress Li Huaqing in many ways. Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Li Guangtu, which would also make Li Tianlan and Jianghu state drift apart. Li Huaqing would also directly go to the opposite side of Li Tianlan. What did this mean? He was the president of Jianghu state. With this identity, he should not be on the opposite side of anyone. He suppressed the giant group and the southeast group and gave up on the giant group. But no matter what he did, in essence he was not an enemy of others. Even if he suppressed Emperor Dong's palace now, it was only for the balance of Jianghu state. But once he really went to the opposite side of Li Tianlan, the meaning was completely different. Li Tianlan would not have an easy time. In the future, Li Huaqing would not have an easy time either. This was tantamount to a lose-lose situation, which was also not what Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan were willing to bear. So Dongqing Wudi became the best buffer. If he persuaded Dongqing Wudi and let Dongqing Wudi talk to Li Tianlan about Li Guangtu on behalf of Jianghu state, this was undoubtedly the best situation. Li Huaqing did not want to become enemies with Emperor Dong's palace. All he wanted was balance. Li Tianlan was young and impetuous. Under impulse, he might do something that would make everyone regret, but Dongqing Wudi could definitely consider it for him. So Li Huaqing thought that the possibility of persuading Dongqing Wudi was still very high. And what he needed to pay was nothing more than some exchange of interests. Is this a threat? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then suddenly laughed. Haha, must. You rarely say this word. On all kinds of occasions. It's not a threat. Li Huaqing shook his head. I just want to try to create a situation that everyone can accept. This is a discussion with you or even a request. It doesn't matter. Li Guangtu can't be lost. Dongqing Wudi silently put out the cigarette but in the ashtray. Li Huaqing ate a piece of beef and suddenly smiled. Smells good. I heard from Lin that Hanbing sent it here? Dongqing Wudi glanced at Li Huaqing intentionally or unintentionally, nodded and said nothing. At this time, Li Huaqing mentioned Shi Hanbing, which seemed to have some meaning. He is your right-hand man in the Border Control Corps. Have you ever considered transferring him to Yuzhou to help you? The task of the army headquarters is very heavy. Having a capable general can save a lot of effort. Li Huaqing continued to laugh. Dongqing Wudi also smiled and said calmly, the Border Control Corps is also a big business and someone needs to take care of it. Li Huaqing unconsciously tapped the edge of the table with the chopsticks in his hand, as if he was hesitating about something. This hesitation only lasted for a second and then disappeared. He laughed and said calmly, you can let the Qing dynasty go. Dongqing Wudi suddenly raised his head and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing's smile was indifferent, and his face was inscrutable. Chapter 1197. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Huaqing silently and did not speak for 5 minutes. There was a plate of beef and 2 glasses of wine. In the smoke, Li Huaqing quietly tasted the beef in front of him, which was really tasty, and let Dongqing Wudi brainstorm in silence. Shi Hanbing went to Yuzhou. The Bai Qing dynasty went to the border. If this was Li Huaqing's condition to get Li Guangtu back from Li Tianlan, it seemed to be too generous. Dongqing Wudi didn't have time to think about how generous it was, but he could clearly see Li Huaqing's sincerity and kindness from this so-called exchange. Dongqing Wudi silently picked up the glass in front of him, drank up the wine in the glass in front of him and took a long breath. I'm not hostile to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing finally spoke again with calmness in his faint smile. I will give Tianlan an explanation about the Li family, Phoenix Pavilion, and Kunlun City, which will satisfy him. What I want to do is very simple. It took us thousands of years to go from feudalism to democracy. This is historical progress and an inevitable trend. It's hard to understand how subtle it is. Invincible, if you are not in my position, it's hard to understand. I fully recognize Tianlan's ability and the height that Emperor Dong's palace can reach in the future. Jianghu state wants to see a heavenly son who can be supreme in the dark world, but I don't want this heavenly son to be supreme in Jianghu state and ignore everything. If all this happens, it means that we are reversing history and it can't last long. There is no misunderstanding between Tianlan and me, but there are some unpleasantness. I think such unpleasantness should be controlled within a normal range. Gu Xingyun is selfish, Jiang Shangyu is ambitious, and Li Guangtu is too paranoid. To be honest, I don't like them, but their existence can make Tianlan more aware of his position and position. There are some things that you, me, Tianlan, and everyone can't touch. If you touch it, it will be subverting the system. What I want to do is to let Tianlan walk on the most right path. I can see through Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu. They may be thoughtful, but their purpose is too obvious. But I couldn't see through him. I didn't know what he wanted or what his future would be like. His mind was not simple but chaotic. No one could say that Emperor Dong's palace could become what it was today because of Tianlan's painstaking efforts. He wanted to control everything, but it seemed that he did not have a strong desire for power. This wasn't a compliment, but a warning. I don't even know what he wants, how can I trust him? The most important thing is that Tianlan is still too young. His mind and his martial arts are all in the process of continuous growth, faster and faster. Jianghu state needed a heavenly son who could deter the whole world as an individual. Unless it was the last resort, Jianghu state would not give up on him. So I need people like Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu. It's also a kind of protection. The three of them are no match for Tianlan, so how can they defeat Emperor Dong's palace? But in the framework of Jianghu state, with their covetous eyes, Emperor Dong's palace will be more cautious. Crack. The lighter lit the cigarette. A misty mist floated in the living room. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and said flatly, "What I want is the balance of Jianghu state, a controllable situation. In this situation, everyone is controllable. You, me, every director, every member of parliament, every wealthy family including Tianlan, can be controlled. That's the only thing I want. As for other things, power, wealth and status, as long as Tianlan asks, I can give them. But if he wants Jianghu state, I can't give it to him." Dongqing Wudi continued to be silent. After a long time, he slowly nodded and said, "I see." Li Huaqing's words and deeds were consistent. Dongqing Wudi was very clear about this. If not, there would not have been a fundamental conflict between Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. Li Tianlan's 2 years in the desert prison were 2 years when the Southeast Group and the Giant Group were reshuffled, and also 2 years when they were strongly suppressed by the Academy and the Prince Group. But compared with Chen Fangqing and the Prince Group's relentless pursuit, the academics always hindered the Prince Group intentionally or unintentionally. Although it did not seem obvious, it was true that Li Huaqing was controlling some progress. Chen Fangqing wanted to eradicate the cancer of Jianghu state. But there was no cancer in Li Huaqing's eyes. What he wanted was a stable situation. For some forces that were so powerful that Jianghu state could not control, he would weaken them, but he would never choose to completely destroy them. In his eyes, a destroyed Wang family of Beihai was also a huge loss to Jianghu state. So Chen Fangqing could not bear it anymore and came up with the so-called termination plan. Now Li Huaqing treated Li Tianlan the same way. Emperor Dong's palace was now controllable, and it was completely under the control of Jianghu state. Emperor Dong's palace was very powerful, rich, with many masters and amazing potential. These were objective facts. But in front of Jianghu state, what was the current Emperor Dong's palace? Everything they had just started, and all their potential and even their financial resources had not been exchanged for real strength. If Jianghu state was determined to move against Emperor Dong's palace, from beginning to end, it might be just a matter of pressing a button. In a few minutes, everything in Emperor Dong's palace would disappear. Li Huaqing could not make such a decision. But he also saw the possibility that Emperor Dong's palace would be powerful beyond control. So he kept Gu Xingyun, supported Jiang Shangyu, and wanted to rescue Li Guangtu in order to create an opponent who could balance Li Tianlan. He could give Li Tianlan everything he wanted, but he would never allow Emperor Dong's palace to rise completely and control Jianghu state while breaking away from the control of Jianghu state. If it really came to this, it would no longer be a game. Instead, it was a battle to the death where blood flowed like rivers. This was what Li Huaqing tried his best to avoid. So he found Dongqing Wudi tonight. It was not a negotiation or a threat. It was full of sincerity and kindness. Shi Hanbing was transferred to the army headquarters. Bai Qingzhao was transferred from the army headquarters. This also meant that as long as Dongqing Wudi was willing, Bai Qingzhao would be the next commander of the Border Control Corps. There was no problem with Bai Qingzhao's qualifications. The only flaw might be his strength. Compared with Dongqing Wudi, who was at the top of the half-step invincible realm, Bai Qingzhao was only at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In the Border Control Corps he was far from the strongest. But because of his origin and Dongqing Wudi's relationship, these flaws were nothing at all. Bai Qingzhao was in this position now. Then 5 years later, as Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi retired, The possibility of Bai Qingzhao taking over Dongqing Wudi's current position would be infinitely close to 100%. This would undoubtedly allow the giant group to better protect the new group that had just risen. And because the giant group continued to be strong in the army headquarters, the academics would also become a firm ally of the giant group and even the new group in the next 5 years or even longer. This was not a condition for exchanging Li Guangtu. This was a signal. And as long as Li Tianlan accepted this signal, then everything else could be discussed. I will go to Tiannan as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi said in a steady voice, have a good talk with Tianlan. Chapter 1198. Late at night, Dongqing Hongguang, who had fallen asleep, received a call from Dongqing Wudi. The old man was 80 years old. Although his martial arts foundation at the peak of the thundershocking realm was still there, the aging of his body was inevitable. He had been living like a prince for many years and had gradually let go of his martial arts. His state began to decline more than a decade ago. As he grew older, his spirit began to deteriorate, so he generally went to bed early and got up early. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the phone rang. Usually, Dongqing Hongguang would get up and take a walk on the mountain in about an hour if there was no accident. The timing of Dongqing Wudi's call was subtle, which was enough to show the urgency of the matter. Turning on the chandelier in the bedroom, Dongqing Hongguang sat on the bed and shook his head hard. Outside the bedroom, there were rapid but light and not the slightest messy footsteps. As one of the few veterans of the older generation in Zhongzhou State, the minister of army headquarters more than 20 years ago, and the anchor of the giant group, Dongqing Hongguang's health was of great importance to everyone, not only his enemies but also his own people. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Dongqing Hongguang was still there, the giant group might be lonely, but it would never disappear. It was the same as the Li family back then. How earth-shattering was the case of treason. But Li Honghe could still leave Yuzhou with nearly 2,000 elites of the Li family and enter the border. It was not a complete retreat, but it also preserved the core strength that should be preserved. So when the light in Dongqing Hongguang's bedroom was turned on, the highly focused guard on duty had pressed the call button. The medical team that the parliament had assigned to Dongqing Hongguang rushed out with instruments and all kinds of drugs in line with Dongqing Hongguang's physical condition and stood at the door of Dongqing Hongguang's room. I'm fine. Dongqing Hongguang shook his head. When he saw the caller ID on the phone, he quickly sobered up. He held the phone, said something to the door and then continued, "Go back and rest." Yes. There was a crisp and powerful voice outside the door, and the footsteps gradually faded away and finally disappeared. The phone call from Dongqing Wudi also stopped. Dongqing Hongguang thought about it and called Dongqing Wudi directly back. The phone rang once and was quickly connected. The roar of the helicopter's roar came faintly from the other end of the phone. Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly, and Dongqing Wudi's apologetic voice rang in his ears. "Dad, am I disturbing your rest?" "I'm fine." Dongqing Hongguang's voice was steady. "I'm old. I don't have much sleep. If I want to sleep, I'll have plenty of chances in the future." Before Dongqing Wudi could say anything, he smiled and asked directly, "What's the matter?" "The president just left my place." Dongqing Wudi did not hesitate to enter the whole body directly. The internal style of the Dongqing clan had always been straightforward. It was the standard military style, iron-blooded and direct, and what they disliked most was nonsense. Dongqing Hongguang narrowed his eyes and answered with confusion. "It's about Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little unclear in the roar of the helicopter's rotors, but every word reached Dongqing Hongguang's ears. Just yesterday Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun besieged Tianlan and suffered a crushing defeat. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun escaped with serious injuries. Li Guangtu was captured alive by Tianlan and brought back to Xinyuan City. The president is here for this matter. Dongqing Hongguang froze in place and did not speak for a while. He had a regular schedule and went to bed early. When the news that Li Tianlan had seriously injured the three masters and really established his invincible status spread throughout the dark world, Dongqing Hongguang had already fallen asleep. This was undoubtedly a very important piece of good news, but it was okay to know the good news later, so no one disturbed Dongqing Hongguang's sleep. Dongqing Hongguang himself did not expect that Li Tianlan would bring such a huge impact to him within a few minutes after waking up. After a long time, Dongqing Hongguang took a deep breath and smiled. "Okay." He whispered softly, almost murmuring with an imperceptible tremor. This piece of news came to his ears abruptly, driving away all his drowsiness. Thousands of words were constantly brewing in his heart. This day was too long. The past was vivid in his mind. Time was like a knife, and the pictures of the past were constantly flashing in his mind. That year, Li Honghe, who was still at his peak, left the mountain of the Dongqing clan with the newborn baby in his arms. Dongqing Hongguang stood on the top of the mountain, silently watching the old and the little figure get farther and farther away. In front of them was the spreading frost and snow. At that time, Dongqing Hongguang told himself that 20 years later, the child taken away would become the pillar of the giant group and even the whole Jianghu state. Invincible and invincible. More than 20 years. The Dongqing clan had been waiting for this day for too long. There were accidents, setbacks, pain, and uneasiness. But in the end they got the result they wanted most. Dongqing Hongguang was in a daze. He did not know what to say for a while except for the word good. The bedroom door was slowly pushed open. Uncle Fu, the old butler of the Dongqing clan, came in with a cup of tea, put it in front of Dongqing Hongguang and quietly left. Dongqing Hongguang finally came to his senses and took a deep breath. The corners of his mouth curled up uncontrollably. His hand that was holding the phone kept trembling, but his voice was still steady as he hummed in agreement. The president wants to get Li Guangtu back from Tianlan and hopes that we can communicate with Tianlan. Communicate. Dongqing Wudi whispered, I'm on my way to the airport now, ready to fly straight to Tiannan. There was no airport in Tiannan at present. Flying straight to Tiannan obviously would not take a passenger plane. The sound of the helicopter was whistling. Dongqing Wudi obviously took a helicopter from the Hidden Dragon Sea to the nearest military airport and took a fighter jet straight to Shenyuan City. With the speed of the fighter jet and the speed of Dongqing Wudi's arrival at the airport, Dongqing Wudi could appear in Emperor Dong's palace within an hour. That's an expected attitude. Dongqing Hongguang said lightly, then frowned slightly. You're in a hurry. Dongqing Wudi was silent, then smiled and said, At this time he could naturally go to Shenyuan City to communicate with Li Tianlan, but such a hurry might stimulate Li Tianlan's reverse psychology. Of course he had to go to Shenyuan City, but there was no need to be too anxious. The parliament was indeed worried about Li Guangtu's life, but if Li Tianlan really wanted to kill him, he would not have taken him back to Shenyuan City. You take a passenger plane to Nanyuan City and enter Shenyuan City from there. Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Dongqing Wudi hesitated and said with a smile, Okay. What on earth did the academics promise Tianlan to make you so anxious? Dongqing Hongguang smiled faintly. They relented about the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi said. What else? Dongqing Hongguang asked indifferently. The Border Control Corps was indeed a problem, but if the Dongqing clan fought for it with all its might, there was at least a 70% chance of winning the position. The only variable was that some of the backbone forces at other levels of the Border Control Corps might be transferred away, so as to weaken the Dongqing clan's influence on the Border Control Corps. Li Huaqing mentioned the Border Control Corps, but in fact what he offered was not the position of a commander, but the position of a part of the backbone forces. These were naturally very tempting but not enough. This was not like Li Huaqing's style. He was not so narrow-minded. He means to let Han Bing enter Yuzhou and let Qing Chao lead the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi continued. Dongqing Hongguang was stunned and narrowed his eyes. He understood Li Huaqing's meaning immediately. Dongqing Hongguang slowly stood up, took a sip of tea and suddenly said, These are all for the giant group. What about Tianlan? Li Tianlan was from the Dongqing clan. Li Huaqing had made sure of this. But now no one dared to say that Emperor Dong's palace belonged to the giant group. Li Huaqing said that these were all benefits for the giant group, but what could he give Li Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then whispered the most important condition given by Li Huaqing, Beijiang. Chapter 1199. Li Huaqing offered the heaviest bargaining chip. No matter what other thoughts he had in his heart, or whether he would be very reluctant, in that kind of negotiation atmosphere, the bargaining chip he offered must be fully guaranteed to be fulfilled. Beijiang. This was what he planned to use to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace. The province of 1.7 million square kilometers was equivalent to 1/6 of the total area of Jianghu state. It was the largest province in Jianghu state and a province that had always been coordinated by Jianghu state councillors. This was an unparalleled temptation. It was also an unprecedented challenge. For Emperor Dong's palace this was the case. The new group was rising in Jianghu state with incomparable vigor. Everyone inside and outside the game could see its increasingly clear outline. With Shenyuan City as the core and Jianghu as the foundation, the shadow of Emperor Dong's palace was slowly shrouding Dongshan, Jiangnan, Xie, and Nanyue. If Beijiang was added, the new group almost had a kind of power that was almost no less than that of the Southeast group. If Tiannan also became a part of Jianghu state in the future, with its special geographical location and source, Tiannan province would inevitably have an absolute position in the future. From another perspective, as long as Li Tianlan could keep his current territory in 5 or 10 years, the new group would be a supergroup with 3 counselors in the worst case. The strength of the Southeast group lay in its 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Wuxia and Beijiang. As long as Emperor Dong's palace accepted Li Huaqing's conditions, they would have 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Nanyue and Beijiang. In the future, Tiannan would be added. In his current state 10 years later, there was no need to use uncertain adjectives such as almost, probably, and perhaps. The new group would inevitably become the most powerful group in Jianghu state in 10 years. There was no doubt about this. Li Huaqing means who will go to Beijiang? Dongqing Hongguang's voice was a little low. Dongqing Wudi thought for a moment and said softly, "He didn't say." Dongqing Hongguang laughed, and his voice seemed to be mixed with sneer and emotion. Beijiang was in front of them. It was an opportunity, a temptation, and a problem. The most difficult thing was that the new group had no one. The new group had a lot of talents. Not to mention others, just in Jianghu, the team that Wu Jingmin had painstakingly brought out for more than 20 years was enough to support a large group in time. What was the situation of Jianghu in recent years? Since the Li family, Wu Jingmin had been firmly rooted here. They seemed to be a part of the Southeast group, but as the territory of the Li family, Jianghu faced the ubiquitous pressure from the Southeast group and the covetous eyes of other major groups. Everyone wanted to break up the last bit of the Li family's power and take Jianghu into their own hands. Jianghu had been very stable in the past 20 years, but it was also unstable. All kinds of transfers were carried out intermittently. Under such circumstances, it was a miracle that Wu Jingmin could stand firm in Jianghu. This was not his own miracle but a miracle that belonged to the entire Jianghu. Those who were able to walk to the top and become Wu Jingmin's trusted aides were all true elites left behind by the great waves. There weren't many of them, but each of them could hold their own, be it in terms of ability or loyalty. They were all top-notch. With Wu Jingmin's entry into the cabinet and the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, Jianghu began to rise. Zhou Yuanshan entered Jianghu. Wang Jingxin left Lin and Dongqing Qiuqi followed closely. Jianghu had made all kinds of big moves in recent years. As the outline of the new group became more and more clear, the forces of the entire Jianghu began to break into the righteous altar of Zhongzhou state in a very aggressive manner. This was the greatest wealth that Li Honghe had left to Li Tianlan, and its significance was even greater than that of the veterans of the Li family standing beside Li Tianlan now. The new group was now in a clear but secretive structure. With this election, 6 of the 13 congressmen in Jianghu would take more important positions, including the governor of Nanyue, the speaker of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the speaker of Siye, the governor of Jiangnan, and so on. This was the full outbreak of the power of Jianghu after more than 20 years of accumulation. It was like the sun piercing the dark sky, symbolizing the rising sun of the new group. In another 5 years, with the current team of the new group, they might be able to win more key positions of congressmen. But they needed to stay there for 5 years. Judging from the current situation, no one in the new group had the qualifications to compete for the position of congressman, and no one had the qualifications to go to a key province like Beijiang. That was why there was the initial integration of the giant group in the new group. According to the normal development, the giant group would be integrated into the new group sooner or later. As the heavenly son from the Dongqing clan, the Bai family and the Zhou family and Yuzhou all fully approved of Li Tianlan inheriting all this. But it took time. It was necessary to complete many exploratory integration in the elections again and again to ensure that there was no too much turbulence and backlash within the giant group. Otherwise, Emperor Dong's palace would not absorb help. It would be constant trouble and internal instability. Now in this election only 5 people or 4 had been confirmed to join the new group from the giant group. The first one was Bai Qingqian. She was undoubtedly qualified to go to Beijiang. As an extraordinary woman in the altar of Zhongzhou state, although Bai Qingqian was a woman, she could be called one of the most powerful chairmen in Zhongzhou state. It was not the kind of unreasonable oppression. In the working state, Bai Qingqian had a sharp and clear mind, a strong sense of the overall situation, a good sense of advance and retreat, aggressive sharpness, and steady as a rock. In the eyes of the outside world, Bai Qingqian joining the new group was definitely a good move. If she continued to stay in the giant group, the position of congressman might be her end. But now, after joining the new group with the strong rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Bai Qingqian might very well become the second female prime minister since the founding of Jianghu state. History always repeated itself. The first female prime minister since the founding of Jianghu state came from the Wang family of Beihai, which was the period when the Wang family of Beihai quickly reached its peak. Now, with Emperor Dong's palace constantly sprinting toward the peak, who could be sure that Bai Qingqian could not reach this level? After Bai Qingqian, the second confirmed to join the new group from the giant group was Cheng Huaining, the highest commander of the European garrison. After the election, he would be transferred back to Yuzhou and become the spokesperson of the new group in the army headquarters. The third and fourth were the husband and wife, Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi. Zhou Yuanshan was the absolute core flag task of the giant group after 20 years. His joining the new group represented the decision of the integration of the giant group in the new group. Now Zhou Yuanshan was the governor of Nanyue. The giant group and the new group were trying their best to push him to the position of Speaker of Nanyue in the election. Nanyue's economy was extremely developed. Although it was occasionally overtaken by Wuxia inexplicably, Nanyue was the only place that was qualified to compete with Wuxia for the position of the first province in Jianghu state. Almost all the speakers were congressmen. Zhou Yuanshan, who was 38 years old, was undoubtedly not qualified to be a member of parliament. The direction of the giant group and the new group's efforts was to push Zhou Yuanshan into the parliament and serve as an honorary member of parliament. Another name for honorary member of parliament was alternate member of parliament. It had a certain power of a member of parliament. It could participate in the meeting of the parliament and had the right to speak, but it had no right to vote. But as long as he could enter the parliament, express his views and have ideological confrontation with the giants, it was enough for Zhou Yuanshan. The honorary member of parliament could barely stay in Nanyue, so the two groups were now sparing no effort to promote Zhou Yuanshan. Similarly, Zhou Yuanshan was also a candidate who could barely go to Beijiang. But no one would be willing to give up Nanyue and choose Beijiang. The bargaining chip offered by Li Huaqing was indeed tempting enough, but it was also like a dilemma. Because the new group could not push out a candidate who could go to Beijiang to serve as the speaker for the time being. The giant group had such a candidate, but it was already their plan to let 4 people join the new group. At this time, if they let a member of parliament enter the new group, there would inevitably be turbulence inside the giant group. Now the best choice seemed to be to let Bai Qingqian give up the position of deputy prime minister and go to Beijiang. After all, Li Huaqing still agreed with some of Chen Fangqing's ideas. He also did not want to see the emergence of a new group that was too strong in the cabinet. But his approach was relatively mild, which was equivalent to exchanging the largest province of Jianghu state for a position in the cabinet. This is a good bargaining chip. Dongqing Hongguang said faintly, it's just a complete exchange and exchange of duties. In fact, we even suffer a loss. That's it. Does he still want to exchange for Li Kuangtu? Does he want to get something for nothing? Tianlan won't agree. Dongqing Wudi laughed. Then why are you still going to Xinyuan City? Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows. I'm in a hurry now because I'm waiting for Li Huaqing's new bargaining chip. In addition, I want you to give me some advice. Maybe we should take the initiative and make some requests. The corner of Dongqing Hongguang's mouth moved and he fell silent. Dongqing Wudi smiled, with a touch of high enthusiasm and excitement in his voice. Tonight, before Li Huaqing came to me, many people contacted me. Huh? Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows slightly. Star State Army Department, Men in Black German Army Department, England Army Department, France Kunlun City. All kinds of forces, there are about 20. Dongqing Wudi chuckled. Dongqing Hongguang froze for a moment and then laughed. That thing, is it settled? It's been brewing for a few months and now the time is ripe. I signed my name on the document, and the result is as we expected. Dongqing Wudi laughed and said, maybe at this time the news has begun to explode in the dark world. He held his mobile phone, looked out of the window at the deep night and whispered, Old Master, our time has really come. Chapter 1200. The busy crowd began to disappear. All kinds of instruments were turned off one by one. In the secret room that gradually quieted down, the mechanical clock on the wall ticked. Jiang Shangyu looked at the communication that had been hung up and turned to look at Gu Xingyun. In 3 hours we'll go back to China. Ha! Gu Xingyun sneered, but there was an extremely weak look in his eyes. His breakthrough was smoother than he had imagined. In just a few days he went from close to the peak of the invincible realm to the top of the peak of the invincible realm. In terms of physical fitness alone, his physical fitness had exceeded the boundary of the peak of the invincible realm. Such a huge and explosive progress could be said to be a meteoric rise. In this state, Gu Xingyun was sure that he could easily beat 3 or 5 of himself before the breakthrough. He thought he was standing at the peak of the dark world. This feeling didn't change even after he lost to Li Tianlan. There was only one person who was truly invincible in the world. But others also had the power to stand at the peak. Whether Li Tianlan was there or not, Gu Xingyun felt that he was standing at the top of the dark world. His body had crossed the uncrossable boundary. As long as he was given time, in 3 or 5 years, he was confident that he could completely improve his realm and reach the level of Li Kuangtu. He thought that in this way he could lead Kunlun City to continue to take root in Jianghu state. Maybe he would face the oppression of Emperor Dong's palace, but with allies like Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu, his future would never be desperate and gloomy. But now, he did have the power to stand at the peak of the dark world. But other than that he had nothing. What else can I do when I go back to China? Gu Xingyun said lightly. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him. Your mentality will make me lose my confidence in you. The current situation is really bad, but it's not unacceptable. We still have a chance and our cooperation. It's your cooperation with Jianghu state. Gu Xingyun said in a cold voice. Does Kunlun City have the capital to cooperate with you now? What does your cooperation with Jianghu state have to do with me? Do you think it's a betrayal? Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. Does it matter? Gu Xingyun said with a faint smile. Of course it is important. Jiang Shangyu nodded. You are our ally and Kunlun City is a very important part of our strength. As I said at the beginning, it will be beneficial for both of us if we cooperate. He paused for a moment then laughed again. And besides standing on my side, do you have any other choice? It looks like it, but it's only looks. You can reject everything we talked about today and leave Jianghu state angrily. For Jianghu state this is a betrayal. Li Huaqing's thunderous fury is not something you can handle. Because, at your position once you leave Jianghu state, you will violate the bottom line of Jianghu state. No matter how stiff the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan is, in this case he will let Li Tianlan clean up the mess. Without our allies, you are no match for Li Tianlan now. Or, are you going to seek refuge with Li Tianlan? Just like hundreds of years ago when you turned to the Lin clan and then wagged your tail beside the original Li family? Jiang Shangyu smiled brightly. Let's not talk about dignity. You and I both know that dignity is not important in the face of survival. But do you really think Li Tianlan can accept your surrender? It's impossible. You know that. Li Tianlan can't tolerate you. He wants to annex the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Many people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital can't tolerate you, and the elders of the Li family who stay with Li Tianlan can't tolerate you either. So you can't join Emperor Dong's palace. Even if Li Tianlan temporarily takes you in, you are just a dog at his feet, even worse than a dog. You can only be cannon fodder to deal with us. When he uses you to clean us up, guess who will be the next one to die? Gu Xingyun listened with no expression. Jiang Shangyu rubbed his brand new arm. This was the real arm that he made for himself with his authority before the real environment blocked the world. Feeling his arm becoming more and more flexible, he said in a flat voice, only we are your best allies and your best choice. What I can be sure of is that Li Tianlan's state when he fought with us was a little special. Under normal circumstances, we are indeed no match for him, but there shouldn't be such a big gap between us. I'm not talking about whether we can catch up to his strength, but at the very least, his strength is within our understanding. In this kind of environment, if we attack him again, the result will definitely be different. You said it yourself. Gu Xingyun said coldly, only for now. The present is the present and also the future. Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, I think Li Tianlan has reached the peak state he can reach, at least infinitely close. In the future, Li Tianlan may make further progress, but it will not be too obvious. What is certain is that it is impossible for him to make a huge breakthrough in combat capability and reach the level of Wang Tianzong in Mormons. This is impossible. Gu Xingyun raised his head and looked at Jiang Shangyu seriously. Jiang Shangyu did not explain anything. Unknown had completely fallen. This was something he confirmed from absorbing Unknown's memories. The real environment had completely sealed off the Miracle City. It was theoretically possible for Li Tianlan to break through the blockade of the real environment by himself. But it was only in theory. If he wanted to break through the blockade of the real environment, Li Tianlan needed the real brand. But his true imprint was not complete. Li Tianlan's real brand and a wisp of his soul were deep in Qin Weibai's real brand. This was the key to Huangshi to protect Qin Weibai and not let her die completely. But now it became the key to blocking Li Tianlan's room for progress. because the real Qin Weibai had already died in the Eternal Sword. This also meant that Li Tianlan had no possibility to break through the blockade of the real environment. After his combat capability reached a certain level, because his soul and real brand were not complete, he would never make any progress in his life. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth and said, "We don't have nothing now. We just take a step back for the time being. I still have a trump card in my hand." He looked at Gu Xingyun and whispered with a smile, "After going back, find a suitable opportunity, maybe I can play this card. Enjoy the look of making Li Tianlan collapse. How about it? Are you looking forward to it?" Chapter 1201. In the deep and obscure night, the fighter plane that took off from Yuzhou landed at a base in Nanyun. Dongqing Wudi, who didn't waste any time along the way, walked alone on the prepared helicopter. In the roar of the rotors, the night of Nanyun was receding, and the brilliant lights of Shenyuan City were getting closer and closer. Jiang Shangyu left the Secret Research Institute in South America. He and Gu Xingyun were going to a small city 200 kilometers away, then take a train across hundreds of kilometers of wilderness to another city, and then take a plane back to Jianghu State. The ground of America had been shaking slightly. The huge earthquake with continuous aftershocks was spreading to the entire American land plate, and there were whales everywhere. If the railway was destroyed, the train was naturally useless. Jiang Shangyu had begun to consider the route from South America to North America and then to Jianghu State. After a sleepless night, Li Huaqing returned to his office in the Hidden Dragon Sea and made a cup of strong tea by himself. Exhaustion hit his body and mind like a tide, but his brain was not sleepy at all. He looked at the clock on the wall, calculated the time after Dongqing Wudi arrived in Tiannan, and waited quietly for the news. Guo Wentian, the only leader of the Prince Group, had left the Hidden Dragon Sea after hanging up the communication with Jiang Shangyu a few hours ago. His current whereabouts were unknown, but it was clear that the Prince Group was now ready to welcome the new situation. Tiannan Heaven Capital. The governor of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sword energy that pervaded heaven and earth surged under the night sky. Daybreak, Dawn, Phoenix, countless masters and elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were still trapped in the headquarters. The sword energy blockade left by Li Tianlan didn't weaken at all. Standing in the center of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and looking at the night sky, colorful sword lights flashed from time to time between heaven and earth, with sharpness and killing, trapping all the forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that wanted to go out. No one could break through the sword energy left by Li Tianlan here. Including Daybreak, another invincible realm expert in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The surging sword energy swept the whole city. Daybreak once wanted to break through by force, but under the blockade of the sword energy he could barely take 3 steps and had to retreat with serious injuries. No one could leave. But the news was still being passed on. Everyone already knew the cooperation between Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun. They also knew that Li Guangtu was now captured by Li Tianlan. The atmosphere inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital became depressing and gloomy, and even a little dull. Snow Country. Wang Xiaoyao, who had returned with serious injuries after the battle in North Sea, locked himself in the dark hall and looked at a lit LCD screen in the center of the hall. His eyes flickered and no one knew what he was thinking. On the stage, a formidable person in North Sea, Wang Xingxiao, who was wearing a coat of sword energy, looked at the vast sea in the distance without saying a word. Wang Tianzong's sword energy stood beside him as if he seemed to be waiting for something quietly. The news that the 3 masters besieged Li Tianlan caused a stir in the dark world. But the dark world quickly fell silent again. Amidst the extreme pressure, every force and every person seemed to be waiting for something. Everyone knew what they were waiting for. The suffocating feeling was suffocating. At 4:50 in the morning, Jianghu State time. Dongqing Wudi had just arrived in Shenyuan City. The news that everyone had been waiting for swept through the entire dark world at the speed of a hurricane, exploding everyone's thoughts. The army headquarters of Jianghu State, Kunlun City of Jianghu State, the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong Palace, Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, European Alliance, Shadow Throne, Snow Country Military Department, Sanctuary, Rothschild, Dark Knights. Star State, Men in Black, Army Headquarters, Fantasy World, Heroes Club. Burning Legion, Mercenaries on Fire, Death's Embrace, Shadow Blade, Flame Chariot, one country after another. One force after another formed the current Dark World. That night, all the forces in the Dark World jointly released a new message. This was undoubtedly an extremely rare thing. But to a certain extent, this wasn't a rare occurrence. Because the Dark World had experienced many times in the past decades and centuries. It had been 5 years since all the major forces released the news together. Everyone knew very well that there was only one thing that could make all the countries and the major forces release the news together. This news might not be absolutely accurate, but it was also absolutely authoritative. It was a list that fully demonstrated the comparison of the peak power of each country and the major superpowers. To be more precise, it was the New World Divine List ranking. It included dozens of countries, all the superpowers, hundreds of second-class large forces, countless mercenary groups, and a large number of killer organizations. It included the entire Dark World. After a series of games, it was recognized by all the forces and announced to the World Divine List ranking. Everyone was paying close attention to the list. On the short list, everyone could see the power of Jianghu state completely rising in the Dark World. The 15th place on the World Divine List, the last place. The former commander of the Border Control Corps, the youngest marshal of the army headquarters of Jianghu state, the disciple of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, Jianghu. Although Jianghu, who had been defeated by Li Tianlan, had been imprisoned in Beihai for the past 2 years, it was obvious that the Dark World had not forgotten him. This list had been recognized by the Wang family of Beihai. In a sense, it seemed to indicate that Wang Xingxiao had plans to restart Jianghu in the near future. The 14th place on the World Divine List. 2 people tied. The Deputy Palace Master of Emperor Dong's Palace, the former number 1 of Samsara Palace. Heavenly King, Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, St. Wei Kunlun. Daybreak, the Lord of Sanluo Temple in Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The two broke through to the Invincible Realm at roughly the same time. Although they had not fought many times in the past few years and it was difficult to compare, their specific realms were roughly the same. They both barely stabilized their Invincible Realm strength and were good at using swords. There was some other meaning in putting these two people together on the 14th place on the World Divine List. The 13th place on the World Divine List was also tied with 2 people. The Deputy Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's Palace, the Governor of Sai City in Jianghu State, Situt Sangyue, the Hidden God of Jianghu State. Ramelin, the Commander of the Burning Legion. The Burning Legion had taken root in Tiannan so far. It could be said that it was the strongest force in Tiannan except for Emperor Dong's Palace. Ramelin, the commander of the Burning Legion, and Situt Sangyue were both experts who were close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. All the major forces recognized this ranking. If the parties involved did not recognize the tie, they could push down those who were as famous as themselves. The 12th place on the World Divine List. Afar, the Chief of the Dark Knights. Afar's injury had not healed since the chaos in Snow Country, but he had recovered his combat capability. His strength was also recognized as slightly stronger than that of Situt Sangyue and the others. The 11th place on the World Divine List. Moraid, the former deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps in the Sanctuary and the chief of the Knights Templars. As an expert who was closest to the peak of the Invincible Realm, his strength was obviously stronger than the last few. Everyone recognized his ranking. The 10th place on the World Divine List. Paul, the current Patriarch of Rothschild. The current Patriarch of Rothschild, who was seriously injured after taking action once in the chaos of Snow Empire, seemed to be somewhat tragic, but his personal strength was beyond doubt. 9th on the World Divine List. Dark Knights Guild, Dark Queen Moongaze. There was no doubt that in the few years after the death of the Master of Samsara Palace, Mochizuki Song, who had supported the Dark Knights alone, had become the most legendary female expert in the Dark World. 8th place on the World Divine List. Wang Xiaoyao from the Wang family of Beihai. His ranking was ahead of Moongaze and Song, which was the result witnessed by the entire Dark World in the final battle of Beihai. 7th place on the World Divine List. Li Shi, the wife of the former governor of Kunlun City and the current deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's Palace. No adjectives were needed to prove his achievements. Everyone could see one fact clearly. That was Li Shi's strength. Li Shi, the peak of the Invincible Realm. To be exact, it started from Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List. The weakest of the top 8 on the World Divine List was at the peak of the Invincible Realm. This was a lineup that had never been seen on the World Divine List in the past hundreds of years. It signified an unprecedented amount of gold. It also meant that an incomparably grand era had completely descended. Chapter 1202. If Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List, had not clearly made the Dark World feel anything, then the appearance of Li Shi, the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's Palace, who ranked 7th, had completely made the Dark World realize that this year's World Divine List was incredibly valuable. Wang Xiaoyao was also at the peak of the Invincible Realm. It was just that he had hidden his strength for too long. Now that the news had spread, it gave people a feeling that he was very strong but also a little weak. But Li Shi was totally different. Before she officially became the Deputy Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's palace, most people in the Dark World did not even know who Li Shi was. Only a few superpowers upper echelons understood the power behind this name. As the center of the special warfare system of Jianghu State in the past 2 decades, the names of Kunlun City and Jianghu State's war god Gu Xingyun could be said to be famous in the Dark World. But those super forces all knew very well that the person with the highest realm and the strongest combat capability in Kunlun City was not Gu Xingyun. It was Li Shi, the wife of the city governor of Kunlun City. When Gu Xingyun was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Li Shi was already at the real peak of the invincible realm. Now Li Shi, who had been at the peak of the invincible realm for many years, announced to the whole Dark World that she had officially set foot in the Dark World after becoming the Deputy Palace Master of Emperor Dong's palace. All the countries and forces in the world ranked her 7th. My ranking is low? Or was it too valuable? Gu Xingyun could be said to be a frequent visitor to the World Divine List in the past 20 years. The ranking of the Divine List took place once every 5 years. Gu Xingyun had been on the list for the past 4 times, from the initial 9th place all the way up. 10 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 4th on the Divine List. 5 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 5th on the Divine List. 4th or 5th. At that time, Gu Xingyun was not at the peak of the invincible realm. In the past few decades, the Dark World's impression of the peak of the invincible realm was that it was powerful, the peak, and irresistible. This realm represented the true upper limit of an individual's combat ability. It represented the top 5 or even the top 3 on the Divine List. This was a combat power that could affect a superpower or superpower. Now Wang Xiaoyao, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 8th. Li Shi, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 7th. The peak of the invincible realm, which once represented the top of the Divine List, could only be ranked in the middle this time. The whole Dark World was shaking. Everyone knew that this might be the most terrifying Divine List ranking in the Dark World in hundreds of years. Looks like the whole thing is. The withering Dark World was changing. After the major forces withdrew from the stage, there was less chaos but more cruelty. What kind of world-shaking figure would be able to ascend to the top of the Divine List, which was filled with so much value? After Li Shi. 6th place on the World Divine List. Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Jianghu State and the governor of Kunlun City. His breakthrough had been confirmed by the Dark World, and the news that the 3 experts besieged Donghuang had also spread throughout the Dark World. As a newly advanced expert at the peak of the invincible realm, under normal circumstances he should rank behind Li Shi and even behind Wang Xiaoyao. However, in the end, Gu Xingyun was still ranked 6th in the rankings that all the major forces agreed upon. The reason? The reason was that Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu besieged Li Tianlan together. Although Gu Xingyun was seriously injured, he did not die. This was the only reason, and it was also the reason that all the major countries and forces recognized it. Just because he did not die after besieging Li Tianlan, he was ranked ahead of Li Shi and Wang Xiaoyao. The top 5 of the World Divine List, which had always represented the peak of the Dark World's combat power, had already been changed. 5th place on the World Divine List. First Commander of the Border Control Corps of Jianghu State, Li Guangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. This was a ranking that was subject to a lot of controversy but was finally pushed out reluctantly. In fact, in the previous Divine List, the 2nd to the 4th would be a little controversial. But since it could be finally determined, it represented the recognition of the whole Dark World. The absolute genius of the Li family in the past, the deity who could once compete with the Sword Emperor, was ranked 5th on the Divine List. This had something to do with him being captured by Li Tianlan. But in any case, within 5 years, unless Li Guangtu could kill the people ahead of him, this ranking would be unshakable. 4th place on the World Divine List. There was no title and there was even little introduction. It was just a name. Jiang Shangyu. Under the information of the Divine List, almost everyone listed a lot of battle records. Jiang Shangyu's battle records were the least described, but his battles were the most dangerous. He had fought against Li Tianlan 3 times. His combat capability surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Everyone felt that he deserved the 4th place on the World Divine List. The top 3 of the World Divine List were the peak of the peak. Every name was so dazzling. 3rd place on the World Divine List. Former patriarch of the Lin clan Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who rarely fought and was even in a state of seclusion, would fight. His record of fighting was more than Jiang Shangyu's. He was a super veteran expert who had been in the Dark World for decades. As the Lin clan's activities in the Dark World became more and more intense, their former patriarch was finally pushed to the third place on the World Divine List. Second place on the World Divine List. Wang Xingxiao, patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. This was a ranking that made the Dark World feel emotional, but they had to admit that it was not a wrong ranking. The second place on the World Divine List could be said to be a person, or a ray of sword energy. He was Wang Xingxiao. But to some extent, it was the sword energy of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong that pushed Wang Xingxiao to the second place on the Divine List. Perhaps many people would not be convinced by Wang Xingxiao, but who in the Dark World could say no to Wang Tianzong's sword energy? The sword energy was added to Wang Xingxiao. Under the 6 paths of reincarnation, Wang Xingxiao's combat capability would be infinitely close to Wang Tianzong's in the period of Mormons. It was completely natural for him to be ranked second on the Divine List. The first place on the Divine List meant that he was absolutely invincible in today's Dark World. There could be no dispute. It seemed that people had begun to discuss it a few years ago. Until now, it was recognized by all the superpowers and countless forces in the Dark World. Li Tianlan had a name that was recognized by the whole world. Dong Huang. The first place on the Divine List, the Palace Master of Eastern Palace, Li Tianlan. There was no doubt, no argument, no challenge. Challenge? A day ago, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th on the Divine List had already jointly challenged. They were seriously injured and defeated. A little further away, the second place on the Divine List also challenged Li Tianlan and was also defeated. Further away, Moraid, Ramiro, Paul, Wang Xiaoyao, they had confirmed the look in their eyes. They were all people who had been taught a lesson by Li Tianlan. The Divine List of the world was shining brightly in the Dark World. It was boiling, restless, and spreading. That year, Li Tianlan was about to be 23 years old. He stood at the highest point of the world's martial arts and looked back at the top of the Divine List. Behind him were 14 so-called big shots who were equally famous in the Dark World. That year, Li Tianlan had not really touched the end of martial arts. But in the current Dark World he was already the Real Supreme. So in his eyes, the so-called World Divine List. 14 experts in the invincible realm or beyond the invincible realm. Except for a few friends. The rest were non-entities. Chapter 1203. The sky above Yuzhou City turned bright. In the spacious and luxurious office of the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Huaqing stared at the computer desktop in front of him and was silent for a long time. He did not expect that he, who had been waiting for the news that Dongqing Wudi brought about the compromise between Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan, would wait for the new ranking on the Divine List. The ranking of the Divine List was a major event in the Dark World. It could even be said to be the top priority. 15 people on the Divine List. It could be said that the various superpowers flaunted their military might every year. The ranking was held once every 5 years, and each ranking took about 3 months to sort out and communicate. Li Huaqing knew about the Divine List. This started a few months ago. At that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison. The ranking, especially the top ranking, was highly controversial. In the beginning, the European alliance ranked Lin Fengting first. East Island and Star State thought that Li Guangtu should be ranked first. Zhongzhou State recognized Wang Tianzong, who had disappeared in the Dark World but did not die. Of course, someone mentioned Li Tianlan. But at that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison and had not entered the invincible realm. No one thought he was the first. However, after several discussions, people had tacitly agreed that Li Tianlan would occupy a place in the top 5 of the Divine List. But the next few months were turbulent. After leaving the desert prison, Li Tianlan could be said to have soared to the sky. He was like the blazing sun of this era, hanging in the sky of the Dark World, illuminating everything with a light that would never fall. Li Huaqing quietly looked at the list in front of him. The news of the ranking of the Divine List swept across the world like a hurricane in the Dark World. The first to upload the list was the dark side of the world. Everyone who truly integrated into the Dark World knew the dark side of the world. This was not a faction. Instead, it was a website that people in the industry understood but outsiders could not enter no matter what. This was the largest network platform in the Dark World. All the words could be translated into the languages of various countries. Any major event in the Dark World would appear on the website as soon as possible. The dark side of the world had appeared in the Dark World for hundreds of years. Every time the Divine List ranking was released, it would be released first. The Divine ranking released by the dark side of the world represented absolute authority. It was tantamount to an official announcement. This was a dark forum where countless people were active every day. On the homepage there were a lot of clear and concise but rich titles, radiating to every corner of the dark world, involving a series of secret transactions such as war employment, time-limited assassinations, arms trade, intelligence trafficking, and so on. The dark world was in turmoil every day, and at least 60% of the transactions were conducted through the dark side of the world. The Dark Forum, originally established by the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild, had lasted for hundreds of years. Today all the superpowers in the world, including Jianghu state, had a certain proportion of shares in the dark side of the world. It was no exaggeration to say that this was the official forum of the dark world. The post on the forum regarding the New World Divine List ranking had been pinned in red. It had been stuck for 5 years, and it would only be removed when the next Divine List ranking was announced. Li Huaqing silently opened the pinned post. An incomparably gorgeous list of names appeared in front of him. It was pure black with a hint of hazy scarlet. From Li Tianlan, who ranked first, to Jianghu, who ranked last. In the background of the list, there were countless seals in different styles. And the signatures of all the major countries. The army headquarters of Jianghu State, Kunlun City, Star State, Snow Country, the overall seal of the European Alliance, the seals of various European countries, the Shadow Throne, the Wang family of Beihai, Rothschild, the Dark Knights. The seals of all the forces were scattered in various places of the list as the background, providing absolute authority for the list. On the list, 15 golden names were arranged one by one, representing the highest majesty of the dark world. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Tianlan's name at the top of the list, his eyes twinkling. The divine list was a feast of the dark world, the ultimate force that all the major countries and forces showed off to the outside world. The dark world had never been peaceful. On the dark web, there were tens of thousands of agents and spies from all countries lurking every day. Countless killers and mercenaries accumulated their wealth in blood and sin. The games and calculations of all countries had never stopped. There were many things in the dark world that everyone had to fight for, but there were also many things that could be solved through negotiation. The ranking of the divine list represented absolute deterrence in a certain sense. Li Tianlan's ranking on the divine list would undoubtedly give Jianghu State a great initiative in the next international game. This was the role that a top expert could play for a country. From another perspective, the more Li Tianlan could bring to Jianghu State, the more confidence he had to ask for his own treatment. This was a very fair thing. That was to say, with the announcement of the divine list ranking and Li Tianlan's ranking on the top, Li Tianlan had another bargaining chip in his hand for many things in the future. The relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Jianghu State was too subtle. The 2 years in the desert prison was Jianghu State's suppression of him. The shuffling of the giant group and the southeast group was also a suppression of him. The storm caused by Chen Fangqing's death also exposed the idea of Jianghu State's intention to suppress Emperor Dong's palace. Although this was just an idea that had not been implemented, the reason why it was not implemented had nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace. And Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Gu Xingyun and suppressing the treason case that year, which to some extent touched the bottom line of Li Tianlan and the entire Li family. Li Huaqing said that he would give Li Tianlan an explanation. But the so-called explanation had not been seen yet, and Li Huaqing intended to forcibly rescue Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan. What would happen to Li Guangtu in Li Tianlan's hands? There would be many possibilities. Maybe Li Guangtu would be imprisoned in Emperor Dong's palace for the rest of his life. Maybe Li Guangtu would desperately fight with Li Tianlan and eventually die in Li Tianlan's hands. Maybe Li Guangtu would let go of the knot in his heart and accept Li Tianlan's position as the leader of the Li family. Maybe, there were many possibilities. But what would happen if Jianghu State rescued Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan's hands? There was only one result. Jianghu State's attitude was almost to support Li Guangtu, to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace go tit for tat, even kill each other. Li Huaqing could say that he wanted to balance, talk about the future, talk about the overall situation. Whatever he said was good, dignified, or from the bottom of his heart. In any case, this was his position. From the standpoint of Emperor Dong's palace, Jianghu State's move was to let the Li family kill each other to maintain their so-called balance. This was the overall situation in Li Huaqing's eyes. How could Li Tianlan accept it? If suppressing the treason case had made the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan drop to the freezing point, then Li Huaqing's intention to take Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan was tantamount to crossing Li Tianlan's bottom line. So even if Li Huaqing was the president in the face of this situation, he had many concerns. He didn't even communicate with Li Tianlan in person. Instead, he asked Dongqing Wudi to go to Shenyuan City. But was this safe? Li Huaqing's eyes began to wander on the divine list again. This year's divine list had changed dramatically. Among them there were some familiar figures. For example, Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, Situ Cangyue, and Lin Fengting, who had never been on the divine list before but knew the dark world very well. 15 people on the divine list, 17 in the invincible realm, and most of them were newcomers. Wang Xingxiao, Jiang Shangyu, Wang Xiaoyao, Wang Yue Shengu. These names fiercely impacted the psychological defense line of everyone in the dark world. Especially Li Tianlan, who was on the top of the list, made everyone feel unbelievable and at the same time sincerely convinced. This list was full of the old and the new. This was because the name list of the two intersecting eras had officially begun to reveal the era of Donghuang. Donghuang was 23 years old. Li Huaqing could find countless reasons why Li Tianlan did not dare to fall out with Jianghu State. But he could also find several reasons why Li Tianlan dared to fall out with him. At 23 years old, he was invincible in the world. At this age, no matter what he did, it wouldn't be too surprising. In the cold morning temperature, Li Huaqing took a light breath. Li Tianlan's ranking first on the divine list would bring great benefits to Jianghu State. But the premise was that Li Tianlan still belonged to Jianghu State. Li Huaqing had never thought of expelling Li Tianlan from Jianghu State. But in the current situation, if he wanted to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace, he had to pay more. During the period when the divine list was announced and caused a sensation. If Li Tianlan was forced out of Jianghu State because of Li Guangtu, then Jianghu State would become the laughingstock of the dark world for at least a few decades in the future. And Li Tianlan, who was forced out of Jianghu State, would also become a nightmare that made Jianghu State breathless in the next few decades. This was the most unacceptable situation for Li Huaqing. Not to mention how many irresistible disasters Li Tianlan would bring to Jianghu State in such a situation. If Li Tianlan was really not in Jianghu State, there was no doubt that Jiang Shangyu and even Gu Xingyun, who were more ambitious, would be out of control. In such a sensitive situation, facing several top experts in the dark world, even Li Huaqing had to carefully control them. They were undoubtedly godly weapons that could shock the world, but if one did not control the godly weapons well, they would be the first to be decapitated. Li Tianlan wanted to stay here. Li Guangtu wanted to save him. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun also had to stay. This was Li Huaqing's bottom line. Once the balance formed by these people was out of control, it might be the beginning of the decline of Jianghu State's national power. The delicate relationship between Jianghu State and Emperor Dong's palace was no secret now. This was something that could not be hidden at all. With the announcement of the divine list, there must have been a lot of people secretly ready to take action, ready to find a suitable time to extend an olive branch to Li Tianlan. What should Li Huaqing do? In the long silence, Li Huaqing stood up from the smoky office. Do what you should do. That was his answer. He walked out of the office. Ma Si, who had already gone to work and was sorting out the materials, stood up immediately. Li Huaqing did not give Ma Si a chance to speak. He waved his hand and ordered in a low voice, "Get ready. We'll go to Tianan now." Chapter 1204. Light was the purest color. The faintly discernible light shone in wisps, dancing in the bedroom as if it were alive. It spread, decomposed, and finally turned into tiny imperceptible light particles. The light particles touched the ubiquitous sword energy around them. Li Tianlan could clearly feel the faint vitality contained in the light particles. Xinyuan Wuxiang stood beside him. The light radiated from his palm. His face was flushed with anger, embarrassment, and a hint of embarrassment. The light particles slowly integrated into Li Guangtu's body, who was in a coma. Li Guangtu's aura gradually stabilized at a very slow speed, and then began to strengthen little by little. There was no medicine, no equipment, and no assistance. Xinyuan Wuxiang stood in front of Li Guangtu, and there was only the pure light constantly radiating from his palm. Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly, slightly narrowing his eyes. Xinyuan Wuxiang had saved people twice. The first time was to save Wang Yue Xiang'a, and the second time was to save Xiao Mahai, the major domo of Emperor Dong's palace. But this was the first time Li Tianlan saw him make a move. Saint, who was lucky enough to see Xinyuan Wuxiang's treatment process, had roughly described the scene at that time, and accurately summarized it in 8 words. The holy light was wanton and surging. Xinyuan Wuxiang was a doctor. But it was definitely not a conventional way for him to save people. The light rippled, and it could even be said to be a special ability. Li Tianlan didn't know whether there was such a thing as a special ability in this world. The wisps of light that bloomed from Xinyuan Wuxiang's hand were barely within his understanding. If he thought about it carefully, the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state in his body seemed to have a similar effect as the light in Xinyuan Wushang's hand. They were both pure and rich vitality. But the dragon vein could only work on him. And Xinyuan Wushang had mastered this vitality. Therefore he could be said to be the most brilliant doctor in this era. But the holy light was overflowing and surging. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the dim light particles in the air that seemed to disappear at any time. The light particles barely formed light spots when they gathered and then quickly dimmed. No matter how low the standard was, the scene in front of him didn't seem to be surging. Li Tianlan watched Xinyuan Wushang toss and turn with an embarrassed face for nearly half an hour. Li Guangtu's aura was indeed increasing. However, he was still in a comatose state. This was completely different from what the saint had reported. Jisong of the Healing Moon, 40 seconds. It took less than half a minute to heal Xiao Mahai. The treatment for Li Guangtu had been going on for 30 minutes, but it still didn't seem to be working. Li Tianlan knew about Li Guangtu's injury. Strictly speaking, his injury was much more serious than Xiao Mahai's and Mochizuki's at that time, but Li Guangtu's physical strength was also far stronger than Mochizuki's and Xiao Mahai's. After all, Li Tianlan didn't want to kill Li Guangtu. When he made a move, he didn't go too far and even took into account the internal injury of Li Guangtu. Jiang Shangyu obviously knew this, so he had no choice but to let Li Guangtu stay. If it were him or Gu Xingyun instead of Li Guangtu, the moment Li Tianlan made a move, one of them would definitely die. Therefore, if they were in the same physical strength, there was no reason for Li Guangtu's injury to be more serious than Xiao Mahai's. Li Tianlan frowned and suddenly said calmly, "Just heal him. It doesn't matter even if you let him return to his peak state. Don't worry about anything." His voice was very light, but it contained extreme calmness and confidence. Xinyuan Wushang's mouth twitched and he became more and more embarrassed. Of course, he knew that he didn't have to worry about anything. Even if he did, it was not Li Guangtu. With Li Tianlan's current level, even if Li Guangtu was in his peak state, what threat could he pose? But in fact, although he was a little embarrassed to say it, he twitched the corner of his mouth and finally said, "I've tried my best." Yes, this was a situation that even Xinyuan Wushang himself didn't expect. He had tried his best, but it still ended up like this. He knew that the real environment had resealed the earth and he could feel it, but he didn't expect that it would be sealed to this extent. Compared with before the seal, the strength of the real environment now was more than 100 times stronger. This directly led to a crazy decline in Xinyuan Wushang's healing ability. Now he could still be said to be the top doctor and even could be said to be the best, but it was difficult for him to create miracles. In the real environment there were no miracles. Countless rays of light drifted in the bedroom. After another half an hour, Li Guangtu still didn't wake up. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and glanced at Xinyuan Wushang. Xinyuan Wushang stopped and seemed to observe Li Guangtu. He nodded and said, "There's no problem, but he probably still needs to rest, so he won't wake up for the time being." "How long?" Li Tianlan asked in a flat voice. "About 12 hours. Xinyuan Wushang answered after thinking for a while. "Let's go and eat something." Li Tianlan's figure flickered. He didn't stay in the bedroom. There was no need to leave any protective measures behind. His sword energy had completely covered every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Within the scope of his sword energy, every grass, every tree, and even every trace of air in Emperor Dong's palace turned into peerless sword light in an instant. Wherever the sword energy passed, it became Li Tianlan's home field. Xinyuan Wushang followed Li Tianlan, narrowing his eyes and observing silently. In this state, Li Tianlan moved very slowly. But everyone could be sure that Li Tianlan wasn't walking. His whole body was like a bad signal, appearing and disappearing from time to time, bringing an extremely unreal but absolutely real feeling. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through Emperor Dong's palace became a part of his body. He kept changing positions with the sword energy. In a sense, this was a kind of sharpening and practice for his swordsmanship. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through the field was him, but also not him. None of them were him. Xinyuan Wushang frowned. "Brother." This title naturally came out of his mouth. Li Tianlan also responded naturally. "Where is your real body?" Xinyuan Wushang's tone was a little complicated. Li Tianlan fell silent. He was silent for a long time. His figure flickered lightly in front of Xinyuan Wushang. Li Tianlan, who could flash without walking, didn't say softly until he was out of the castle, "Now I should be my real body." "Should be?" Xinyuan Wushang suddenly felt a little cold all over. "It doesn't matter." Li Tianlan shook his head. Xianyuan Wushang thought that if this wasn't important, what else was important? He had reached such a high level in swordsmanship that he wasn't even sure whether he was his real body or not. Can you walk now? Xianyuan Wushang smiled a little reluctantly with a sense of testing. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded. But compared to walking, it saves more energy and is more focused. Xianyuan Wushang seemed to understand something, but also seemed to have a lot of things he didn't understand. He shook his head slightly and sighed. What's wrong? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Nothing. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said softly, I'm just thinking that in your current state, compared with Xianyuan Feng, who is also in his heyday with full energy, he paused and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Between you and it, who is the sharpest sword in the dark world? Chapter 1205. Li Tianlan smiled casually and did not answer Xianyuan Wushang's seemingly inexplicable question. He just said, Are you sure you only want a small clinic? Xianyuan Wushang stared blankly for a moment, then smiled. Of course, that suits me very well. Both Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian would join Emperor Dong's palace, which had been decided from the day they appeared. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace wasn't sure about Xianyuan Wushang's ability, so it didn't assign him any duties. After treating Xiao Mahai and Mochizuki Song, Xianyuan Wushang showed his ability, but the death of Qin Fangqing and other things messed up the situation. Although the situation was still turbulent, the internal situation of Emperor Dong's palace had stabilized. Li Tianlan naturally did not intend to let him be an idler. Go lead the biology lab. The controllable energy in Xianyuan Wushang was the purest vitality. If Xianyuan Wushang joined the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace, even if he knew nothing, he could improve the efficacy of the gene medicine that Emperor Dong's palace was developing by several levels with this energy alone. The clinic is good. I think it's the most suitable for me. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head without hesitation and said with a smile, I'm best at treating headaches, fever, colds, fever, and diarrhea. I'm really tired of looking at all the data, parameters, graphs, and combinations in the laboratory. As for the biological laboratory, I can roughly provide you with some formulas, but not much. It's probably going to be difficult to gather the materials, but that's about it. Xianyuan Wushang was now a holy disciple. The starting point for a holy disciple was level 1. There was a name that made Xianyuan Wushang feel a little helpless. Nurse. In the current medical field, he was definitely an expert. Even the saint beside Lin Shi could not compare to him. However, under the current circumstances, he could not be of much help. He could naturally lead and play a role in the work of the biological laboratory. In fact, whether it was the biological laboratory headed by Nalin Shuriying in Emperor Dong's palace or the biological laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai that was unrivaled in the world, Xianyuan Wushang had experienced a long time ago. In theory, some of the topics that Nalin Shuriying was tackling, the various aspects of ideas, and the bottlenecks that she had encountered, were not a problem in Xianyuan Wushang's eyes. It was just like how most adults wouldn't be troubled by the question of 1 + 1. But the problem was that even if one knew the exact answer, if one's eyes couldn't see, ears couldn't hear, mouth couldn't speak, and hands couldn't move, he wouldn't be able to tell others the exact answer. Xianyuan Wushang wasn't blind or mute, but there were some things he couldn't do anything about. He knew what Nalin Shuriying and the Wang family of Beihai were attacking now. Here it should be called the Eternal Third Generation. This was something developed by the War God Realm and the Human Emperor Palace when they first rose to power. Now it was called the Dew of Life in those two forces. Anything that could increase one's vitality wouldn't be cheap anywhere, but the Dew of Life wasn't that rare either. At the very least, the War God Realm and the Human Emperor Palace, which consisted of hundreds of millions of human soldiers, regardless of whether they were elites or ordinary soldiers, would have a few bottles. As for the potions of the Life series, they were no longer named after generations, nor were they some sort of breakthrough improvement. The Dew of Life, the Blood of Life, the Torrent of Life, the Spring of Life across lakes, rivers, oceans, and even the last treasure of the War God Realm, the real Immortality Potion. Each potion was countless times better. It was the real Immortality Potion that helped Li Tianlan directly enter the Invincible Realm from a seriously injured state. Even if it was absolutely suppressed by the real environment, it still played an incredible role. Judging from Xianyuan Wushang's real level, in theory, it wasn't difficult for him to make the Ocean of Life potion. In theory, that was to say, from a purely technical point of view, the problem was that there were no corresponding materials, let alone sophisticated equipment. The apostles around Lin Shi could make the equipment, but no one could do anything about the materials. If Qin Weibai completely returned to her peak state, she might be able to do it, but it was obviously impossible. Shenyuan Wushang could provide Emperor East with several gene potion formulas that could be made in the current environment. If he said anything more, not to mention whether he could do it, even if he could, it would go against his original intention as a guide. What about Xing Tian? Li Tianlan asked. In the final battle in North Sea, Shenyuan Wushang and Xing Tian were in East Island. Compared with the low-key but mysterious Shenyuan Wushang, Xing Tian had a record of fighting. The only superior of the invincible realm that the sanctuary had cultivated for more than 2 years died in Xing Tian's hands. What was more tragic was that Li Tianlan still didn't know the name of the invincible realm expert, nor did the whole dark world. He said he wanted to be a PE teacher. Shenyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, "There is no school in Emperor East Palace now." Li Tianlan was expressionless and his voice was a little cold. There was a school in Shenyuan City now, and Ning Chenxing also ambitiously proposed a plan to build Tianan University, but it was still far away. He couldn't just casually arrange Xing Tian to be a PE teacher in an ordinary school, could he? "You don't want to contribute to Shenyuan City," Li Tianlan said lightly. "We have no choice." Shenyuan Wushang thought for a while and said seriously, "We can help, such as treating the injuries of Moon Gaze and Song. But we can help. It's difficult for me to do anything else. Our task is not to interfere with the development of Emperor East Palace. At least at this stage, Xing Tian and I can only be onlookers in Emperor East Palace." What? Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. Shenyuan Wushang frowned and whispered, "Because the rise of Emperor East Palace must be real. Absolutely real." His voice seemed to be subconsciously heavier when he said the last few words. After a pause, Shenyuan Wushang continued with a smile, "Similarly, this is also my father's order." "Your father?" Li Tianlan nodded as if he was thinking about the importance of the other party. He had a son like Shenyuan Wushang, and even a servant like Xing Tian? The importance of the other party was self-evident. But was there really such a person? If there was, where was he? "He's not as powerful as you think." Shenyuan Wushang smiled and said, "At least here, if my father fought with you, he probably wouldn't be a match for you." He was referring to the current Li Tianlan and the energetic Ruthless. Although he didn't say it explicitly, it was not wrong to say it that way. "He's been friends with you for a long time, and he really hopes to meet you at the right time." Shenyuan Wushang continued. "He knows me?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "We've been friends with each other for a long time." Shenyuan Wushang said. "I'm curious about what kind of person he is." Li Tianlan laughed. Shenyuan Wushang hesitated and whispered, "I'm not qualified to comment on my father. I think he's a great man, but he doesn't think so of himself." Li Tianlan looked back at him with interest. "How does he comment on himself?" "An unqualified guardian. An idiot." Li Tianlan looked at Shenyuan Wushang with a stiff expression. He had never met Shenyuan Wushang's father, but he knew that he was an unfathomable figure. To comment on himself as an idiot? He was indeed unfathomable. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and he suddenly said, "What about me? What does your father think of me?" Shenyuan Wushang glanced at Li Tianlan weakly. His voice was even lower, as low as a mosquito's hum. "Big idiot." Chapter 1206. Shenyuan Wushang's father's evaluation of Li Tianlan, which seemed a little shocking now. Seeing that Li Tianlan didn't get angry, Shenyuan Wushang told him the whole evaluation. A qualified guardian, an unqualified shaper, a big idiot. This was the evaluation of Li Tianlan from the great emperor whom he had never met. Li Tianlan smiled faintly. He was really not angry. He was just a little curious about the person who called him a big idiot and even thought he was an idiot. After saying that he was looking forward to meeting him, they went to the dining hall of Emperor Dong's palace and ordered some food. Shenyuan Wushang gobbled up the food to replenish his energy. Li Tianlan casually fiddled with the rice in front of him, a little lost in thought. "By the way, brother, I just found a problem and forgot to tell you." Shenyuan Wushang took a sip of coke and sighed comfortably. This young fat man with a beer belly didn't like drinking. At first, he liked to carry a bucket of purified water and take a few sips from time to time. But this habit didn't last long and he began to crazily like Coke, Fanta, Sprite and other messy drinks. So far, it was said that Shenyuan Wushang's highest record was 12 bottles a day. 1-liter bottles. It was said that Shenyuan Wushang didn't drink water anymore. Whether in Yuzhou or Emperor Dong's palace, all he drank was Coke. Such brave deeds made Li Tianlan's scalp numb. He once reminded Shenyuan Wushang to be careful not to drink himself to death. Shenyuan Wushang smiled and said he was not afraid because he was a doctor. Li Tianlan quietly thought that maybe soon he would find a small clinic in Emperor Dong's palace that had more Coke bottles than all kinds of medicine. Maybe it would develop into a hospital in the future. His eyes wandered and fell on Xinyuan Wuxiang's face. What's the matter? There's something wrong with Li Guangtu's body. Xinyuan Wuxiang thought and hesitated, as if he didn't know how to explain in detail. Finally he shook his head. I've studied his martial arts. Perhaps in the dark world, this unique skill was not as famous as the Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation and the 24 moves of sword. But in a sense, the Immortality seal was derived from the 24 moves of sword. To be exact, it was derived from the 24 moves of sword and the Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation. It takes into account most of the advantages of the 6 Paths of Reincarnation sword and the 24 moves of sword, but it also inherits the shortcomings of the two unique skills. The reason why Li Guangtu was able to reach his current level after his martial arts foundation was shattered is not only because of his amazing talent, but also because of the unique way of exerting power of the immortal seal. You should know this very well. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. The Immortality seal derived from the 24 moves of swordsmanship was not difficult for Li Tianlan at the moment. The way this unique skill exerted force was indeed extremely strange. However, under normal circumstances, the combination of the three would be the complete sword, and it would also be the most realistic sword. On the other hand, the foundation of the undying seal was nothingness. This feeling was hard to explain in detail. To be exact, Li Guangtu was not in the invincible realm. Could even be said that he had no realm. After his martial arts foundation was shattered, it had never been repaired. To some extent, the Immortality seal was beyond the scope of the sword energy and the sword intent. It could even be said to be the destructive power that erupted from the spirit and will. This was pure nothingness. Because it was not real, it was ever-changing and everywhere. All the destructive power of the Immortality seal and all the sword energy of Li Guangtu could be regarded as the eruption of the spiritual power. He came to this day from a state where his martial arts were completely crippled. He used the experience of the past, which was illusory. When this illusory experience acted on his spirit and will, his spiritual power exploded with power similar to the 4 realms of martial arts. For example, the storm, the ice, the raging fire, the thunderbolt, and even the sword light of the invincible realm. Almost all the exertion of the Immortality seal focused on the spiritual domain. Therefore, even if Li Guangtu was seriously injured, he still had a strong combat capability. As long as he was energetic and determined, the combat capability he could exert was almost unimaginable. Because his unique skill consumed not physical strength but spirit. I don't like this unique skill. Xinyuan Wuxiang said blandly, but it's very interesting. I heard that Senior Li used to be a world-famous master in the spiritual domain in the dark world. Although he didn't reach the so-called transcendent realm, he was infinitely close to this domain. So it should be normal for Li Guangtu to have some research in this field. The Immortality seal is not hypnosis. Li Tianlan frowned. Of course not. Xinyuan Wuxiang smiled. The word hypnosis is very vivid. The Immortality seal has nothing to do with hypnosis. This unique skill, to some extent, combines the sword energy of the 24 moves of sword, but it uses the explosive power of the 6 Paths of Reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai. This is the core. Li Guangtu's spiritual outburst evolved into sword energy. Under that level of outburst, hypnosis becomes a very powerless thing. It can't be done and there is no need to do it. A person who can resist that level of spiritual outburst is not hypnotized by that level of spiritual power. So what you mean is? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Spiritual power is a very magical thing. Xinyuan Wuxiang said softly, Big brother, your swordsmanship pursues reality and illusion. Then let me ask you a question. Do you know what the end of illusion is? It's reality. Li Tianlan said blandly. An answer full of the charm of order and absolutely accurate. Xinyuan Wuxiang's eyes lit up. Have you ever thought about sister-in-law, He suddenly paused, shook his head subconsciously and changed the topic. Let's give an example. For example, the old man in the Holy Land. His spiritual power is in the so-called transcendent realm, and it is very stable. But the extent of his spiritual outburst is very poor, so he can only hypnotize the enemy, and it is more than enough to protect himself. Under such circumstances, I'm almost sure that even if you go to kill him, it will be difficult to succeed. But Li Guangtu is different. His spiritual power is not as strong as that of the old man in the Holy Land, but it is full of explosive power. He doesn't know how to use these things gently, so every time it erupts, it is uncontrollable, so he can't hypnotize others. The instantaneous eruption brings the most powerful lethality. You mean that spiritual power is illusory, but the end of illusion is reality, so Li Kuangtu's spiritual power has reached the level where he can turn illusion into reality. He is far from it. Xianyuan Wuxiang twitched the corner of his mouth disdainfully. He only uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. For a short moment, his spiritual power can become close to reality, so there is the current sword energy and sword light. These things have lethality, but they can only exist for a moment. How can they be real? He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said softly, "What is real should be eternal." Li Tianlan looked at him thoughtfully. "What are you trying to say?" "It's still about spiritual power." Xianyuan Wuxiang lowered his head and took a big gulp of coke. Although there is a threshold for spiritual power at this stage, the threshold is very small compared to martial arts. Li Kuangtu can't make any progress in martial arts. To be exact, he is actually a useless person. All his combat power is concentrated in spiritual power. If I'm not wrong, Li Kuangtu's spiritual power should be very close to that of that old man in the Holy Land. Once he breaks through, Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. "So," Xianyuan Wuxiang smiled. "Now it seems that the biggest threat to you is Wang Xingxiao, who is integrating Wang Tianzong's sword energy. In fact, the biggest threat to you is Li Kuangtu, but he doesn't know it himself." Chapter 1207. There was no need for Xianyuan Wuxiang to explain anything. Li Tianlan had already understood what he meant and knew what he had overlooked before. He was very familiar with the Undying Seal. In fact, he couldn't be more familiar with it. He knew every move of the Immortality Seal, including the comprehensive move like the back of his hand, or it could be said that his fire was pure. He didn't steal from Li Kuangtu. This unique skill itself was a branch of martial arts derived from the 24 moves of sword. He completely understood the 24 moves of sword, so he naturally understood the Immortality Seal. Therefore, Li Tianlan could also use the Immortality Seal, and it often worked wonders. Even in the same realm, the Immortality Seal in his hands was different from Li Kuangtu's. The difference was not in anything else but in terms of destructive power. Every move of the Immortality Seal in Li Tianlan's hands was more fierce and majestic than Li Kuangtu's. But compared with Li Kuangtu, he always lacked a trace of smoothness and freedom. Li Tianlan always thought that this was the problem, that his study of the 24 moves of sword was not thorough enough. In terms of overall understanding of the 24 moves of sword, he might be able to surpass Li Kuangtu in all aspects, but a different understanding of a certain sword could cause this situation. He knew that his essence was pointed out by Xianyuan Wuxiang. The 5th on the divine list. Li Kuangtu, whose combat capability had obviously surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, was still a useless man in essence. Li Tianlan could vaguely feel that Li Kuangtu's body was a little strange, but he never thought that it would be such a result. Li Kuangtu was not in the invincible realm. He didn't even have a realm. In the War of Treason, his destroyed martial arts foundation had never been repaired at all. The so-called Immortality Seal could reshape the foundation was a lie from the beginning. His body was nourished by a large amount of vitality, so that the strength of his body returned to the peak state. As for the foundation, he never thought about it at all. Every move of the Immortality Seal that could destroy heaven and earth was essentially the power of the spiritual domain. The power of the mind was naturally more unpredictable and strange, but it was also naturally more mellow and free. Li Tianlan deeply mastered the 24 moves of sword. But he knew little about the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could copy Wang Xingxiao's 6 paths of reincarnation, but he could only copy it, not master it. In other words, if he fought with Wang Xingxiao and Wang Xingxiao didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation, he naturally couldn't use it either. But Li Kuangtu knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. The essence of martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was outburst. He combined this kind of essence with the 24 moves of sword and applied it to the spiritual field. From the outbreak of physical strength to the outbreak of spiritual strength, it was more natural, faster, and more bizarre. This was the true state of Li Kuangtu. There is no doubt that Li Kuangtu is a true genius. There is no doubt about that. There was undisguised admiration in Xianyuan Wuxiang's voice. From his point of view, the combination of the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation and the transfer from physical strength to spiritual strength was unimaginable. It could even be said that it was an almost coincidental result of the concentrated inspiration of absolute genius. For Li Tianlan, the significance of this matter was that Li Kuangtu had changed his fighting style, but how could it be so simple? From the perspective of the space-time corridor, this matter was completely equivalent to Li Kuangtu transferring his own authority. He had been transferred from the authority of a martial artist to the authority of the lawful camp. He had inadvertently touched the rules of the world and finally walked on the path represented by Qin Weibai. What did this mean? If this matter was spread back, the entire space-time corridor would be in an uproar. Perhaps Li Kuangtu's strength was nothing, but his success in the transfer of authority meant that the human clan could be more flexible under the starry sky in the future, and it also meant that the authority of neutrality was further expanded. He treated Li Kuangtu and controlled his physical data, so it would take him a long time to write the report to the space-time corridor. So, you mean that Li Kuangtu will break through soon? Li Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly. Maybe it will be faster than you can imagine. Xinyuan Wuxiang smiled softly. In fact, I think that if he hadn't been in a state of injury in recent years, he might have succeeded in breaking through now. Big brother, you know what this means? Of course, Li Tianlan knew what it meant. Once Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, it was equivalent to him entering the supreme realm from another perspective. The old man in the Holy Land was the best example. In the spiritual field, the old man in the Holy Land was supreme. That kind of spiritual power could completely affect the current Li Tianlan. That old man without any martial arts might be the only person Li Tianlan couldn't kill now. And Li Kuangtu was different from that old man. His spiritual power was huge, but he didn't know how to use it conventionally at present. So Li Kuangtu didn't know hypnosis, but he knew what the old man in the Holy Land didn't know. The outburst of spiritual power. Even Li Tianlan felt it a little incredible when he thought about it, and he had to sigh at Li Kuangtu's genius. He mastered the essence of the outburst of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword and turned the outburst of physical strength into the outburst of spiritual power. If Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, his comprehensive combat capability would definitely not be weaker than that of Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons. The destructive power might be a little weaker, but it was more unpredictable and impossible to guard against. A heavenly son who turned the spiritual power into martial arts. Li Tianlan was very confident, but he also knew very well that he was indeed invincible now. But if he fought against Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons? Unless the ruthless energy was at its peak, he had less than a 30% chance of winning against Wang Tianzong at that time. Well, to be precise, the chance of winning was almost equal to 0. But now, according to Xinyuan Wuxiang, Li Kuangtu seemed to have reached the point where he could break through at any time. The premise was that his injury was healed. He really gave me a surprise. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed and whispered to himself, "Why him?" Xinyuan Wuxiang didn't say a word, bowing his head and gulping. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it, saying calmly, "What do you think?" "I can't give any opinion." Xinyuan Wuxiang smiled innocently. "I just give the result. As for how to decide, it's all up to you. Kill him or let him go. Big brother, if you want to kill him, you have to be quick. Don't give face to anyone. His threat is beyond imagination. If you decide to let him go, then you have to ask Zhongzhou State to give you a good price." The melodious ringtone of the phone rang as soon as Xinyuan Wuxiang's voice fell. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. His eyes slightly narrowed, and then he picked it up and called the minister with a smile. Dongqing Wudi's slow but still steady voice sounded on the other end of the phone. "Tianlan, I'm coming to Emperor Dong's palace right now." Chapter 1208. Before the helicopter landed, Dongqing Wudi could clearly feel the almost boiling atmosphere in Emperor Dong's palace. He came quickly. And the news from the dark world was one step faster. The new ranking list on the divine list caused a sensation in the dark world when Dongqing Wudi just entered the sky over Shenyuan City. When the helicopter landed on the tarmac of Emperor Dong's palace, it was greeted by the almost fanatical noise in every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the lawn and looked at Dongqing Wudi, who came out with a smile on his face. "Tianlan, congratulations." Dongqing Wudi laughed. The relief that had been suppressed for many years was being released from his soul little by little. At this moment he seemed to be much younger. "The youngest one on the divine list, at least the next half a century is your time." Dongqing Wudi held Li Tianlan's hand tightly and sighed with emotion. "Now, those who are standing against us, I'm afraid they won't even be able to sleep well. The current Emperor Dong's palace deserves all this." Li Tianlan chuckled softly, looking relaxed. The ranking of the divine list was a storm for the dark world. For countries in the world, it was a comparison of strength in some aspects. On different occasions the list had different meanings. But for the parties involved, what was the significance of the list? At least for Li Tianlan it was meaningless. He had always believed that he was invincible. It didn't matter whether he was ranked first or last, or even not on the list. His opponents would not surrender without a fight just because he was the first on the divine list, nor would they despise him because he was not on the divine list. No matter how the list was arranged, it didn't mean much to Emperor Dong's palace. What Li Tianlan wanted to do or didn't want to do would not change because of the list. The only effect might be to raise the morale a little. You're the one who deserves all of this. Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. Li Tianlan followed Dongqing Wudi and said in a calm tone, "What do you think of Emperor Dong's palace, minister?" "I don't have any opinion, but it's a suggestion." Dongqing Wudi looked around and said, "Now Emperor Dong's palace has the strength, but the development time is short, and the interior is still a little chaotic. This is a common problem for any new force, but any new force is not when it was first established, it was far more cohesive than the other forces. Do you know why?" He didn't wait for Li Tianlan's answer and said directly, "Because any new force has a clear goal at the beginning of its establishment. It has a clear goal, but there is no huge benefit for the time being. So everyone inside is struggling and wants to conquer everything outside. It was the same for Emperor Dong's palace in the beginning, but things are different now. It will be solved." Li Tianlan nodded. He agreed with Dongqing Wudi's view. In fact, not only Dongqing Wudi, but many people who had a deep understanding of the development process of Emperor Dong's palace had the same concern. Emperor Dong's palace was indeed a new power, and its internal cohesion was still there. But what was different from other new powers was that the interests within Emperor Dong's palace were enough to destroy anyone's rationality. Huge interests formed a chain of interests, which became more and more obvious inside Emperor Dong's palace. And it was certain that as Li Tianlan climbed to the top of the divine list, Emperor Dong's palace would absorb more and more interests in the future. Under such circumstances, an organization whose internal duties were not very clear was bound to have great hidden dangers. Perhaps because of Li Tianlan's existence, Emperor Dong's palace would not fall apart. But if Emperor Dong's palace fell into a quagmire of internal strife, it would undoubtedly be no good for its future development. They were the first group of people who followed Li Tianlan to conquer the country. Li Tianlan couldn't even deal with them seriously. "Badian and the people of Sai City are not right, are they?" Dongqing Wudi asked calmly. As the focus of the whole dark world, Emperor Dong's palace had no secrets to some extent. Maybe there were many things that the dark world couldn't see clearly. But after Emperor Dong's palace merged with some forces of Mount Shu, the Flourishing Age Fund, and Sai City after several meetings, everyone could feel the subtle relationship between Li Badian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City. The parliament of Jianghu state could naturally get the news. "He's too sensitive. But at present they are not at odds, but we do need to pay attention to it," Li Tianlan said softly. "Do you know the reason?" Dongqing Wudi smiled. "It's not a secret." Li Tianlan also smiled, but he felt a little helpless. Li Badian and Sai City. To be exact, the relationship between Mount Shu and Sai City had never been harmonious. Li Badian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were in a tit-for-tat relationship. And there was also a knot between Saint and Situ Tsangyue. The reason was well known. Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master, one of the four sword masters of Mount Shu, Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, and Li Shi, the current palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, had been passed down to this day. These three women could be said to be absolutely incompatible rivals in love. It sounded melodramatic, but it was the truth. After Li Guangtu failed at the border, he lost contact with the three of them. Li Shi became the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, Situ Tsangyue went to Mount Taibai, and Yun Qinshi still stayed in Mount Shu. As Li Shi quieted down, Situ Tsangyue, who later established Sai City, was directly targeted by Yun Qinshi. The contradiction between Mount Shu and Sai City had lasted for many years. This kind of contradiction, after Emperor Dong's palace absorbed Nirvana Sword and Great Void Sword of Mount Shu and Sai City, was directly brought to the inside of Emperor Dong's palace. However, after all, it was just a contradiction, not a hatred. So both sides behaved very restrained. Today's subtle relationship was just a long-accumulated unpleasantness, and they couldn't get over it for the time being. It was impossible for Li Badian and Saint to fight with Sai City for Yun Qinshi. After all, now they were on the same side. And Yun Qinshi, as Li Guangtu's former woman, this Phantom Sword Master who had followed Li Tianlan's Snowdance Corps to fight in Snow Country, was an expert of the half-step invincible realm. Shortly after Li Guangtu's identity was exposed 2 years ago, she had joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Of the former four sword masters of Mount Shu, only Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master, was still in Mount Shu. Emperor Dong's palace will enter a period of rapid expansion next. I also intend to take advantage of this time to stabilize the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace. This matter is already being done. Minister, rest assured, everything is still under control. Li Tianlan said lightly. I have nothing to worry about. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. It's just a necessary reminder. Li Tianlan said, Minister, did you come here today for this? This was definitely a question that he knew the answer to. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly and said softly, How is Li Kuangtu? Chapter 1209. Dongqing Wudi's voice echoed in the night, a little bitter, a little difficult, and a little dignified. What happened to Li Kuangtu now? The whole Jianghu state was very concerned about this issue. The news they got was that Li Kuangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. As for what happened after that, all the news was cut off. Why did Dongqing Wudi come here in such a hurry? It could be said that he knew that the list of the divine list would be released in the near future, but the most important thing was to determine Li Kuangtu's state. Li Tianlan left a lot of memorable impressions in the dark world, all kinds of impressions. But no matter what kind of impressions they were, they had nothing to do with being good-tempered and easygoing. Radical, strong, crazy, indifferent, cruel, decisive, straightforward, and impulsive. He was in his early 20s, an age where no one would be surprised by what he did. Li Kuangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. If they didn't agree with each other, it was entirely possible for Li Tianlan to kill him directly, and the possibility was not small. Dongqing Wudi never thought that Li Tianlan was a fool. Even if Li Tianlan couldn't see the current situation clearly, military counselor, Saint Situ Tsangyue, and even Li Shi as well as the old people of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace, were enough to serve as the think tanks of Emperor Dong's palace. If Li Tianlan didn't pay attention to it, they would pay attention to it and tell Li Tianlan. So Li Tianlan must now know the importance of Li Kuangtu. This was also what made Dongqing Wudi most nervous. In his mind, Li Tianlan's answer was very important. If Li Tianlan killed Li Kuangtu before he came, there would be no need to say anything. On the contrary, if Li Kuangtu was still alive at this time, it meant that Li Tianlan was also waiting for the conditions of Jianghu state. At least it meant that this matter could be discussed and it could be a happy ending. What Jianghu state needed was a living Li Kuangtu. If Li Tianlan killed him directly, Dongqing Wudi was not sure whether Jianghu state would fall out with Li Tianlan for a dead man. But if it really happened, there would be a lot of trouble. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Wudi and then laughed coldly. He's not dead yet. He's in a coma and he's badly injured. Dongqing Wudi let out a long breath without concealing it and whispered, You don't want to kill him. Li Tianlan said calmly, You don't want me to kill him? Dongqing Wudi silently took out a cigarette and handed it to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took out a lighter and lit it for him. The two stood under the night sky of Tiannan and smoked. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. To be precise, it's the parliament that doesn't want you to kill him. Li Huaqing's intentions. Li Tianlan said blandly. It was not a question but an affirmative statement. His voice was very calm, but just a simple address seemed to cause the surrounding temperature to drop. Dongqing Wudi's smoking hand stiffened for a moment. Before he could speak, Li Tianlan had already laughed. There seemed to be countless long swords in the sky and earth of Emperor Dong's palace, and the overwhelming sword energy was moving slowly. Li Tianlan's voice was a little cold. He said he would give me an explanation about Gu Xingyun, so I didn't make a fuss and waited for him to give me an explanation. But now he didn't give me the explanation he wanted to give me. Instead, he wanted to intervene in the internal affairs of the Li family? Minister, do you think that if I take a step back, the parliament will think that I'm easy to bully? If I take a step back, the parliament will think that Emperor Dong's palace is a group of bloodless cowards? The night slowly twisted, and the majestic sword energy suddenly covered the starry sky. A huge vortex with a diameter of tens of thousands of meters formed over the entire Shenyuan city in an instant. Li Tianlan's voice was low. What should I do to make the parliament understand what the real Emperor Dong's palace is? Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and reached out to press Li Tianlan's shoulder. Li Tianlan did not move. The vortex of sword energy in the sky began to disappear as his mood eased, but Shenyuan city under the night sky was bitterly cold. Dongqing Wudi frowned. He found that he seemed to have misunderstood Li Tianlan's meaning. Originally, he thought that there would only be two results when he came here. The first was that Li Kuangtu had been killed, and the second was that Li Kuangtu was alive, which meant that Li Tianlan was also ready to negotiate. But now it seemed that it was not the case at all. He sighed and said slowly, What are you going to do about Li Kuangtu? He won't die. Li Tianlan said faintly, I won't kill him for Grandpa or for Rushi. But there is always a price to pay for doing something wrong. When he wakes up, I will talk to him. If he can realize his mistake, it will be the best. If he doesn't know his mistake, I will find a place to let him calm down and reflect on it slowly until he figures it out. Do you want to imprison him? Dongqing Wudi's face changed slightly. Li Tianlan did not speak but looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Jianghu State. Jianghu State needs the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Dongqing Wudi hesitated. What Li Huaqing needs is checks and balances. The power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan corrected Dongqing Wudi's statement. The Purgatory of Heaven capital is a part of the Li family, and the Li family is mine. This is my Li family. Isn't it ridiculous that he wants to use my things to check and balance me and even stop me? What are you going to do? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a long time and then he sighed deeply. What's your attitude, minister? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He stopped where he was and looked at Dongqing Wudi silently. Dongqing Wudi also stopped and looked at Li Tianlan quietly. There was no dissatisfaction, no sharpness, no hostility in Li Tianlan's eyes, and they were not so deep and unpredictable. He just looked at Dongqing Wudi silently, and his eyes were even a little dull, without any emotion. Dongqing Wudi's heart twitched fiercely. At this moment he stood very close to his son, but the gap in their thinking was very far. The parliament is very sincere. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, the president is willing to do his best to help the new group rise. After Nanyue he is willing to give Beijiang to the new group. At present, although the new group does not have enough cutting-edge power, if it is willing to talk, it may be possible to make an exception and promote one. And you know very well what Beijiang means. I can also tell you that this is not all. As long as you are willing to talk, the new group will get more, and even the border control corps is not out of the question. The attitude of the parliament is actually very clear. They don't mind the strength of Emperor Dong's palace. They are afraid that an unrivaled Emperor Dong's palace will lose its goal in the future. As for me, Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself and said, if you are not going to kill Li Kuangtu, I have no attitude. I am just a lobbyist, but I am not going to persuade you. After a long silence, Dongqing Wudi seemed to have made up his mind and said faintly, you are my son, whether you admit it or not, it is a fact. Therefore your attitude is my attitude. I support any decision you make, but I hope your decision is rational. This was the first time that Dongqing Wudi had clearly talked about Li Tianlan's life experience. Although Li Tianlan had understood it before. Li Tianlan's body was stiff in place. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, thank you. The text message prompt sounded on his mobile phone. Dongqing Wudi took out his mobile phone, looked down at the screen, narrowed his eyes and whispered, Li Huaqing is here. Chapter 12:10. A kind of unexpected emotion spread in Dongqing Wudi's heart. Li Huaqing came. Why did he come here? What was he doing here? This seemingly abrupt action of the other party suddenly showed an unusual flavor. Dongqing Wudi was a little confused and instinctively vigilant. I talked to him not long ago. After that, I set off here as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan. Under normal circumstances, he should be waiting for my news in the Hidden Dragon Sea. He came here at this time? He came with bad intentions? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. It's hard to say. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. I understand. It mainly depends on how I deal with Li Kuangtu, right? Li Tianlan flicked his fingers gently, and the burning cigarette between his fingers flew out. The sword energy surged and the cigarette was directly smashed into the finest powder. A flame floated in front of him for a moment and then went out. He really cares about the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Li Kuangtu. Is he so impatient? Li Tianlan's tone was mocking. Maybe he was stimulated by the divine list ranking. Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little irritated. Everything seemed to be getting out of control. Li Huaqing couldn't wait to rush to Xinyuan City. Not to mention anything else, at least it was certain that Li Huaqing's inner thoughts had changed without anyone knowing. What Li Tianlan said was actually right. Li Huaqing came here with bad intentions. On the contrary, the uncertainty of what he said was not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, was a kind of self-comfort. Li Tianlan was not a fool, and neither was Dongqing Wudi. Both of them knew very well what it meant for Li Huaqing to come to Xinyuan City at this time, before he heard from Dongqing Wudi and before he was sure of Li Tianlan's attitude. It couldn't be a good thing. The sense of oppression brought by the personal arrival of the president of Jianghu State had crushed over half of the territory of Jianghu State at the moment the news came. In an irresistible gesture, it completely crushed the last leeway between Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament. This was the strength that Li Huaqing rarely showed. The personal arrival of the president was completely different from the arrival of Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi could represent the parliament of Jianghu state. He could use any identity to talk to Li Tianlan about Li Guangtu. If it went well, everyone would be happy. Even if it went badly, it didn't matter. Dongqing Wudi couldn't do it. Next time Wu Jingmin could do it. If Wu Jingmin couldn't come to an agreement, then Zhou Mulin would come over. Even Zhou Yunhai and Guo Wenyan could come to talk to him one by one, confirm Li Tianlan's attitude in the negotiations, and then give him one bargaining chip after another. This is a stalemate process. This was a necessary seesaw process. Many negotiations required probing over and over again. As long as Li Huaqing was different, there would still be room for negotiation. Under normal circumstances, when the negotiation was almost done, Li Huaqing would participate in the last negotiation and make the final decision before taking Li Guangtu away. It might take a long time, but it wouldn't drag on until after the election. But now, everything in this plan, everything that would have happened under normal circumstances, was skipped over. Li Huaqing did not wait. As the president of Jianghu state, he was leading the entire power of Jianghu state from Yuzhou to Tianan. There was no room for negotiation. He was extremely tough. Everyone knew that when Li Huaqing came to Tianan and left Xinyuan city, there would only be two results. Either Jianghu state would take Li Guangtu away, or Jianghu state would destroy Emperor Dong's palace. It was impossible for the second result to happen. The prestige of the president of Jianghu state could not be consumed in the endless tug-of-war and negotiations. As long as he came, Li Tianlan would have to give him a result in the shortest time. I'm here. If I can't take him away, I'll kill you. How overbearing was this? Dongqing Wudi's face was livid. He held his mobile phone and seemed to be hesitating whether to call Li Huaqing to sound him out. He had a natural position, so if he called him, Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably be suspected of showing weakness. Li Huaqing had never communicated with Dongqing Wudi from beginning to end. Perhaps he, who was on the plane at this time, was waiting for Dongqing Wudi's call. As long as this call was made, he would know that Emperor Dong's palace was not confident. Let him come. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit seemed to completely condense in a very short silence. His voice revealed a kind of killing determination that could tear the world apart, and it was as hard as gold and iron. I'll wait here. Why do you have to do this? Dongqing Wudi frowned tightly and held his mobile phone, but he couldn't make the call. Maybe there is another way. There is indeed another way. Li Tianlan nodded. But I don't accept it. His expression and voice were getting calmer and calmer, almost deep. As long as I leave Emperor Dong's palace at this time, Li Huaqing can't do anything. Li Tianlan looked up at the night in the distance and said indifferently, but this is my territory. Why should I leave? Dongqing Wudi walked up to Li Tianlan. In his sight, he saw a trace of extremely fine but shocking scarlet blood in Li Tianlan's pupils. The wind swept through the night. The sword energy between heaven and earth was like a tide, mighty and mighty. The incomparably strong and even fierce fighting aura surged in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's calm voice became a little hoarse, as if he was trying to suppress something. How dare he? Even if I dare to see him, I dare. Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi frowned. Li Tianlan didn't continue to speak out his rebellious thoughts in the eyes of others. He stopped speaking and seemed to calm down for a moment. The phone rang again. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Li Tianlan, picked up the phone and said in a deep voice, Qingzhao. Are you in Xinyuan city? Bai Qingzhao's voice on the other end of the phone was hurried and anxious. Yes. Dongqing Wudi said yes. I heard that Li Huaqing saw you not long ago. Do you know that he has gone to Xinyuan city now? What is he doing? What does he want to do? Is he forcing us to take a stand? Or is he forcing Tianlan to take a stand? Bai Qingzhao's exasperated voice sounded on the other end of the phone, sounding sharp and high-pitched. Now the whole upper class of Jianghu state knew that Li Guangtu had fallen into Li Tianlan's hands. Everyone knew Li Huaqing's attitude toward Li Guangtu. Everyone also knew that Dongqing Wudi was already in Xinyuan city. At this time, Li Huaqing suddenly rushed to Xinyuan city in person, which had imperceptibly made everyone in the whole parliament tense up, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At this moment, with Yuzhou as the center, the suffocating sense of oppression was spreading over the whole Jianghu state as Li Huaqing approached. Every member of parliament was paying close attention to the development of the incident at this time. Qingzhao, don't worry. We'll deal with it when it comes. Dongqing Wudi said in a deep voice. Maybe there is another possibility. Bai Qingzhao fell silent for a while. After a full 5 minutes he said slowly, is it possible? Of course there was another possibility. That was, in the few hours after Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi parted, Li Huaqing had a new bargaining chip that could persuade Li Tianlan. And he was extremely confident in his bargaining chip. He was so confident that as long as he proposed it, Li Tianlan would never refuse. But was it possible? In just a few hours, a certain decision couldn't even be considered as careful consideration. And Li Huaqing had never been an impulsive person. The phone rang faintly in the phone. It seemed that Bai Qingzhao's phone rang again. Bai Qingzhao hesitated for a moment, but he did not hang up the phone. Instead he answered the phone with the other hand. Through the phone, a somewhat hurried and vague voice rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears and echoed in Dongqing Wudi's ears like thunder. Vaguely, the voice with a slight Qingzhou accent on the phone sounded familiar. It seemed to be the voice of a heavyweight in the supervisory department. Qingzhao, the third supervisory group has entered Jianghu. Chapter 12:11. Was a surprise. On the other end of the phone, the voice that was separated by two communication signals rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears, Dongqing Wudi's ears, and also fell into Li Tianlan's ears. The third supervisory group entered Jianghu. It was hard to describe what he felt at this moment. It was as if a kind of extreme numbness and coldness rose in his body, along the spine, and hit the brain in an instant. All the pores on his body opened, and his hair stood on end. He didn't know whether it was anger or panic mixed together. His blood flowed wildly in his body, and the excited emotion roared to the high ground of reason. Dongqing Wudi clenched his teeth and his eyes were bloodshot. A thought kept roaring in his mind. How dare he? What did he want to do? The supervisory system of Jianghu state had lasted for hundreds of years. It could be said that it was a group of people that could make any feudal official or feudal lord feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The members of the supervisory group were not fixed, the time of supervision was not fixed, and the scope of supervision was not fixed. Under normal circumstances, the inspection team would only decide on the scope of inspection at the last minute if there was a major case that caught the attention of the parliament. Otherwise, although there was a fixed premise, the inspection team would usually give a routine notice before the operation after being authorized. There were very few cases of sudden attacks. As for the leader of the supervisory group and the scope of supervision, this kind of authorization was only in the hands of the president. And today, right now, when the new ranking list of the divine list swept the entire dark world, when Li Guangtu was captured by Li Tianlan, and when Li Huaqing decided to ask Emperor Dong's palace for people, the third supervisory group determined its scope of supervision and inspection. Jianghu. At present, Jianghu had not received the notice at all. There was no doubt that this was Li Huaqing's sudden attack. When the sense of oppression from the hidden Dragon Sea crossed thousands of miles and covered Tiannan, the parliament's edge had directly shrouded Jianghu. The third supervisory group went to Jianghu. Li Huaqing drew his sword. Dongqing Wudi kept taking deep breaths several times. The feeling of numbness in his scalp was still there. But his eyes had completely calmed down. He didn't know whether this scene was a game or something else, but he saw Li Huaqing's toughness and Li Tianlan's uncompromising attitude. The whole Jianghu state seemed to be full of sabers and swords. The fierceness and bloodiness of the battle seemed to be assaulting their senses. Dongqing Wudi held the phone tightly and said lightly, "Who is the leader of the supervisory group?" Wang Wei's team leader, Tong Yang's vice team leader. On the other end of the phone, it seemed that he didn't expect Dongqing Wudi to answer. After a pause he slowly spoke. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and remained silent. At this time, the person who was communicating with Bai Qingzhao was one of the backbone forces of the giant group, as well as the representative of all the forces of the giant group in the Ministry of Supervision. The fact that he could get the intelligence so accurately was enough to show his power in the Ministry of Supervision. Bai Qingzhao said something to the other party on the other side of the phone and then hung up. Bai Qingzhao was not angry. He seemed to have calmed down as well. He said quietly, "Should we do something?" "Of course. It's not our style to do nothing when they're already knocking on our door." Dongqing Wudi twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered. Wang Wei, Tong Yang. They were the current leader and deputy leader of the third inspectorate group. Wang Wei was the former governor of Liaodong. He retired 2 years ago, but he had great prestige in the academics. Tong Yang was an inspector at the level of deputy governor of the Ministry of Supervision and was also one of the backbone forces of the academics. These two people served as the first and second leaders of the third inspectorate group. Obviously, Li Huaqing had made up his mind to monopolize the results of the inspectorate group's inspection of Jianghu. What was Jianghu? Not only the parliament, but all the people in Zhongzhou state who knew that the new group was about to rise knew very well that Jianghu was the core base camp of the new group. The new group had only risen for a short time, so the talent reserve was inevitably insufficient. Many of the territories that the new group conquered needed to be replaced by people from Jianghu. At present, Speaker Jiankang of Jianghu, Governor Dongqing Qiuqi, and even 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jianghu could be said to be popular figures after the election, especially Jiankang, who was the first secretary of Wu Jingmin, the current deputy prime minister of Zhongzhou state. He was a super capable man promoted by Wu Jingmin. After Zhou Yuanshan was transferred to Nanyue, he had been the speaker for just over 2 years, but now he had become the main figure promoted by the new group. After the election he was very likely to enter the parliament. If Li Tianlan could push him into the parliament, then the new group's layout in Zhongzhou state would be easier and more powerful. Headed by Jiankang, Dongqing Qiuqi, 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jiangsu province, and even the first and second leaders of the local municipal governments were now people of concern. This was the power that the Li family had suppressed and accumulated for many years. They were the elites of the elites. Almost everyone had the ability to take on greater responsibilities. Whether they could go up a step and what position they could reach depended on the explosive power of the new group in the period before the election. This battle array could directly determine the scale and foundation of the new group. At this time, Li Huaqing let the third supervisory group enter Jianghu. There was no doubt that it was a drastic measure. This knife stabbed straight at Li Tianlan and the key points of the whole new group. Even if the supervisory group was nitpicking and found a little problem, Li Huaqing would have the possibility to completely magnify it. This could completely affect the explosive power of the new group at the last moment, completely suppress their future scale and the right to speak in Zhongzhou state. What the hell happened? When the list of the divine list came out, Dongqing Wudi originally thought that Li Huaqing would further increase his bargaining chip, but he did not expect that what he waited for was Li Huaqing's almost reckless suppression. What happened on Earth did not seem to matter anymore. What mattered was what he should do after Li Tianlan showed his attitude. Was this kind of suppression a warning to the giant group? A warning to Dongqing Wudi not to interfere in the affairs of the new group? Did he want to isolate Li Tianlan and the new group and make them feel more pressure? Dongqing Wudi sneered. After hanging up the phone with Bai Qingzhao, he quickly found Bai Qingxian's phone number and dialed it. At the same time in Yuzhou. After hanging up the phone, Bai Qingzhao walked out of the study and saw Bai Zhanfang sitting silently in the living room, drinking tea. What did Wudi say? Bai Zhanfang glanced at him and took the initiative to ask. He said that if we do nothing when others have come to fight, it's not our style. Bai Zhanfang said honestly. Bai Zhanfang was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "In that case, let's do something." Bai Qingzhao was shocked, and the blood all over his body seemed to be completely boiling with his father's words. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists tightly and tentatively said, "Then, shall we wait for the signal from Liaodong?" Waiting for the signal from Liaodong was undoubtedly the best way to fight back against the third supervisory group. Bai Zhanfang smiled indifferently and said, "There's no need to be so troublesome. We old guys are still here. Why let the younger generation do it?" He lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "Your Uncle Zhou is already on his way." Chapter 12:12. When the melodious ringtone of the mobile phone rang again in the roaring rotors, Li Huaqing looked down at the mobile phone. The light on the mobile phone screen had dimmed slightly. The upper right corner of the screen showed that his mobile phone still had 17% battery. The beautiful land and rivers of Zhongzhou state were moving backward unhurriedly under the helicopter. Li Huaqing's eyes lit up for a moment, but the glimmer of light dimmed again when he saw the caller ID on the screen. His mobile phone kept ringing. Since he got on the helicopter, his mobile phone had been ringing. The strong wind brought by the helicopter whistled through the entire Zhongzhou state in the night. He went all the way south, leaving Yuzhou with an absolute sense of oppression, passing through Yan and Zhao, Zhongyuan, North Lake and South Lake and entering Xie. After replenishing in Xie, he rushed to Nanyun, Tianan, Xinyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace. No one saw Li Huaqing's hesitation. Countless backbone of the academics, retired old people and then Hua Jinyang, Zhou Yunhai, Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyun, Yi Dongxing and even Wang Qinglei. Phone calls rang one after another. Sometimes when he was talking, there was already a notification tone that someone else was calling him. But the phone call he was most looking forward to never rang. He moved forward in silence. The other party responded with silence. Tianan was getting closer and closer. Li Huaqing looked down at the phone screen that was still lit up and narrowed his eyes. It was Guo Wentian's phone call. Now he finally couldn't sit still anymore? He twitched the corner of his mouth, swiped the phone and answered the call. Guo Wentian on the other end of the phone did not speak for a while, as if he did not know what to say. Li Huaqing did not speak either, just waiting for Guo Wentian to speak. Guo Wentian's breathing became more and more obvious. His personal position, the position of the Prince Group, and his position in Jianghu State, each position was constantly contradictory to what he wanted to say and his attitude. From his breathing, Li Huaqing could clearly hear his constant struggle and entanglement. Is it too urgent? Guo Wentian was silent for nearly a minute before he whispered and asked hesitantly. Are you afraid? Li Huaqing laughed. His words were so blunt that they were a little harsh. Guo Wentian was not angry. Instead, he was silent for a long time and then he said slowly, I don't know. Li Huaqing did not say anything. Guo Wentian continued, I don't know if I'm afraid. I don't even know what I'm afraid of. Are you afraid? Are you afraid that he will kill me? Li Huaqing's smile was obvious. He has the guts. Guo Wentian said in a deep voice and then continued with a sigh, at his age it doesn't matter if he pierces the sky. He's so young and has this kind of strength, that's why there are restrictions. Li Huaqing said blandly, I'm not afraid that he will kill me and we haven't reached that point yet. But I'm afraid that he will leave Jianghu State. This is not the result I want. Guo Wentian snorted unconsciously. Of course he was afraid of Li Tianlan leaving Jianghu State. The parliament was aggressive. If Li Tianlan really fell out with Jianghu State out of anger, Guo Wentian could be sure that he would not survive, not to mention what would happen to Li Huaqing. This was the absolute dominance of extreme personal force. As the number one on the divine list from Jianghu State, if he was forced to leave Jianghu State, the anger and hatred in his heart could make Li Tianlan do anything in his extreme thoughts. No one in the whole Jianghu State could stop Li Tianlan's assassination. This was probably the way to perish together with him. Because if Li Tianlan really did this, no country in the world would dare to accept him, and his end was already doomed. Guo Wentian silently thought about all kinds of possibilities, and finally said in a low voice, You are playing with fire. On the contrary, this is the safest way to do it. Li Huaqing said blandly. There was a harsh sound from the phone, and there was only 10% battery left. Li Huaqing sighed softly. You still don't understand. He didn't explain anything and silently hung up the phone. Perhaps the whole Jianghu State now thought that he was playing with fire, but the safest way was actually his way now. The supervisory group's entry into Jianghu was just the first step. If Li Tianlan didn't agree to hand over Li Guangtu, more obvious and stronger suppression would follow tomorrow morning. Li Huaqing would not go easy on him. This time he would try his best to suppress the living space of Emperor Dong's palace at all levels. This was not to force Li Tianlan to leave Jianghu State. On the contrary, it was to better keep him in Jianghu State. So Li Huaqing came in person. In the stormy suppression, Li Huaqing sent himself to Li Tianlan. From an objective point of view, it was equivalent to giving his life to Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing was very sure that as long as he was still in Emperor Dong's palace, no matter how fierce the parliament's next move was, Li Tianlan would not really leave Jianghu State. The reason? The reason was that he was still by Li Tianlan's side. It was so simple but not simple. As long as he was in Emperor Dong's palace, this was the biggest leeway. It seemed that all kinds of means to fall out with him were just the parliament showing its strength. The parliament also had to show its strength. Not everything could be negotiated. Li Huaqing was very clear about this. Perhaps Li Tianlan himself didn't know how terrible the consequences would be after mastering such strength and power at his age, and how serious the disaster might be to Jianghu State if there were no corresponding restrictions. Youth represented unlimited potential. When Li Tianlan had fulfilled his potential, his youth represented immaturity, a dangerous mindset that wandered outside the rules at any time. This was unacceptable to Li Huaqing. So in any case he had to find a strong opponent for Li Tianlan. Even if this opponent would fail, it didn't matter because it would take time. During this time, Li Tianlan would really mature and understand what he should do. Li Huaqing silently glanced at the phone. On the phone call from Dongqing Wudi or Li Tianlan that he had been expecting never rang. Even from the beginning to the present, he had never received any call from the new group or the giant group. Li Huaqing's eyes gradually became dignified. In the unusual silence, he clearly smelled a touch of fighting and gunpowder. The helicopter flew over Nanyuan and the first city in Tianan. The brightly lit Xinyuan city was close at hand. "President, we will arrive at Emperor Dong's palace soon." Ma Si sat opposite Li Huaqing and said in a serious and dignified voice. Li Huaqing took a last look at the phone, said yes and closed his eyes. The plane flew over the lights of Xinyuan city. Ma Si stood up and planned to go to the cockpit to say something to the pilot. At the same time, on the soft lawn of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, who stood with Dongqing Wudi but rarely spoke, raised his head and glanced at the night sky in the distance. At this moment, the sound of the helicopter's rotors had not yet come from afar. Emperor Dong's palace was quiet in the night. Li Tianlan raised one hand to the night where only the signal lights were flashing in the distance. Boom! In an instant, with Li Tianlan as the center, the world suddenly twisted. The surging and incredible sword energy surged, and the sharp sword intent was completely boiling. The world was torn apart in an instant, and the whole night was completely replaced by sword energy. Like a vast ocean, the sword energy stirred the night tens of thousands of meters away in an instant along the direction where Li Tianlan raised his hand. The sharp sword energy spread noisily. The helicopter that had just entered the sky above Shenyuan City was out of control instantly. The rotating rotors were silently cut into pieces by the sword energy. The helicopter flying in the air suddenly spun and rolled in the air, smashing into the lights on the ground. Li Tianlan raised his hand and closed it slightly. The sword energy all over the sky vibrated at the same time. The falling helicopter seemed to be gripped by an invisible hand at this moment. With the overwhelming sword energy, the helicopter was directly pulled by the invisible hand and rushed into Emperor Dong's palace at an unimaginable speed. The cabin was spinning. Li Huaqing's face was abnormally ruddy. Ma Si fell in the corner with a broken head and a desperate look on his face. The endless sword energy pulled the helicopter from the edge of Shenyuan City all the way to Li Tianlan. The helicopter crashed to the ground, and the huge fuselage slid out of control on the lawn, leaving a deep mark hundreds of meters long. The solid landing gear and the glass in the cabin were completely shattered. Dense cracks appeared on the black fuselage, which had originally looked very majestic, under the wrath of the sword chi. The ridiculously broken helicopter slid all the way and stopped less than 5 meters away from Li Tianlan. With a dull sound, the heavy cabin door of the helicopter fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of smoke and dust. Li Tianlan squinted and looked at Li Huaqing in the cabin, who was facing him motionlessly because of the seat belt. He said expressionlessly, "You're too slow. I'll give you a hand. Welcome to Shenyuan City. Welcome to Emperor Dong's palace." Chapter 12-13. The wind under the curtain of night had completely frozen. In the extreme silence, only the cracks on the helicopter were emitting light sounds and spreading. The sword chi was silent, but it was everywhere. Fine and sharp, it moved around the helicopter from the cockpit to the fuselage and then to the tail. More and more cracks appeared. It was as if a pale white flower had suddenly bloomed on the pitch-black fuselage of the helicopter. Irregular patterns were quietly spreading, as if to surround the entire huge fuselage. Dizziness, anger, helplessness, solemnity. All kinds of emotions and perceptions kept tumbling in Li Huaqing's heart. His body seemed to be immersed in the dizziness of the helicopter out of control and rolling in the air. At that moment, the world was spinning, and death seemed to have shown a grim sneer in the night outside the cabin. The majestic sword energy wrapped the helicopter and kept accelerating, dragging them to Emperor Dong's palace, as if death was mercilessly pulling them into hell. At that moment, what Li Huaqing felt was not fear, but a sense of weightlessness that was completely beyond his control. The helicopter's engine seemed to be barely able to maintain stability, but that kind of power was too fragile under the sword energy. All the stability was completely destroyed in an instant. The sword energy surrounded and pulled him, and the seat belt that held his body in place tightened to the limit. After the world spun around him, his body leaned forward crazily under the violent pull. The bulletproof glass of the cabin was shattered by the sword energy, and the warm night wind of Tianan poured into the cabin violently under the absolute acceleration, bringing with it an indescribable coldness. This feeling would never be forgotten. If this was a show of strength, then it could only be said that this show of strength was really powerful. He was showing the power of Zhongzhou state to Li Tianlan. And now, Li Tianlan was also showing his own power to him. He heard Li Tianlan's emotionless voice and felt the omnipresent sharpness in Emperor Dong's palace. The sharp sharpness covered the sky and the earth. It was so sharp that it was almost fearless and directly pressed against his heart. Phew, Li Huaqing let out a long breath. Li Tianlan stood outside the cabin, motionless like a statue, looking at him with no expression. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him, unfastened the seat belt, walked to the corner of the cabin and pulled Ma Si up. Ma Si had fallen into a coma. When the helicopter lost control, Ma Si unbuckled her seat belt and stood up. The out-of-control helicopter tumbled in the air. Caught off guard, Ma Si's body also lost control and crashed into the metal door in front of the cockpit. He instinctively grabbed the nearest handrail, but as the sword chi pulled the helicopter, the sudden acceleration directly threw Ma Si to the other side of the cabin. Under the huge impact, the top secret of Zhongzhou State directly fainted. Li Huaqing pulled up his secretary with some difficulty. Before he could drag Ma Si out of the cabin, Dongqing Wudi had already walked in first. "Leave it to me. I'll treat his wound." Dongqing Wudi smiled and lifted Ma Si with great ease. Then he went to the cockpit, picked up the driver who was also unconscious, and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing pondered for a moment and nodded. He knew very well that at this time, no matter where Dongqing Wudi stood, he did not want to stay between him and Li Tianlan. This was also acceptable for him and Li Tianlan. Without Dongqing Wudi here, Li Huaqing, who faced Li Tianlan alone, would feel more pressure. And precisely because of his absence, Li Huaqing was also more likely to have a deeper talk with Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing quickly left the scene with the two wounded. Li Huaqing sat in the broken cabin for a while. When the dizziness in his mind almost disappeared, he took a deep breath and walked out of the cabin. The helicopter will be towed away to check the fault. Fortunately, if it hadn't broken down near Emperor Dong's palace, the consequences would have been unpredictable. Li Tianlan said lightly. "Fault?" Li Huaqing's eyes narrowed and he said with a smile, "So, I should thank you for saving my life?" "You're welcome." Li Tianlan was still expressionless. Li Huaqing smiled. He was very curious as to why he could smile now. All his actions since he came to the stage seemed very gentle. But gentleness did not mean that he had no temper, nor did it mean that he would appear to be weak. In fact, in the hearts of many people, the gentle and calm Li Huaqing was far more deterrent than the other counselors who banged the table and roared. But at this moment, Li Huaqing was really not angry. Even if the young man in front of him attacked him, destroyed a helicopter, and even made him and his secretary extremely embarrassed, his heart was calm. Maybe it was because he valued him too much, and in his heart he also had too many expectations for him? Li Huaqing never knew that he would value a person so much and be optimistic about his future. Even though the two of them were now on opposite sides. The third supervisory group's entry into Jianghu is just the beginning. Li Huaqing said, "In the next few months, the 1st to the 10th supervisory groups will be sent out one after another. The inspection scope is very large, including Wuxia, Liaodong, Beihai, Nanyue, Southwest and Northern City. This is the normal inspection tour before the election. Jianghu is just the first stop. This time, the third supervisory group's inspection scope is Jianghu, Jianghuai, and Huading." "I believe you really?" Li Tianlan nodded lightly and his tone was a little careless. He did believe what Li Huaqing said, but it did not mean that the third supervisory group had no other purpose in entering Jianghu. Whether they had other purposes or not, Li Huaqing's words stood. Li Huaqing turned his head to look at Li Tianlan and suddenly laughed. He reached out and pointed at Li Tianlan. "You boy, I know you have emotions, so when I just came to Emperor Dong's palace, you gave me a show of strength. What? Or are you unhappy? Do you want to beat me to vent your anger?" Li Tianlan turned his head to look at Li Huaqing, and the corner of his mouth twitched symbolically. "I can understand your emotions and even understand what you think of me now. But in my current position I have things I should do." "I don't have emotions," Li Tianlan said lightly, "but there is one thing that needs to be clarified. You came at the wrong time. At this time, it is difficult for Emperor Dong's palace to really welcome you." "What?" Li Huaqing smiled casually. "Next, I will deal with some internal affairs that belong to our Li family, or the family affairs of the Li family. This is our own business and we will not welcome anyone who wants to intervene." "How do you know that I am going to intervene in this matter?" Li Huaqing was calm. Li Tianlan did not answer him but smiled casually and said, "It's best that you are not. Maybe I misunderstood." He paused and continued, "But many people seem to be very interested in the family affairs of the Li family. Maybe you don't want to intervene, but others seem to be ready to intervene." He looked at Li Huaqing and suddenly laughed. "I'm going to stay in Shenyuan City during this period of time. I'd like to see exactly what kind of things dare to extend their claws towards me and interfere in my family's affairs. If I really see them, I'll chop them into pieces. I think you won't mind, right? Li Huaqing stopped laughing. He looked at Li Tianlan and narrowed his eyes. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. The two of them stared at each other. They were expressionless. Chapter 12:14. It was 3 o'clock at night. The sudden ringtone of the cell phone rang in the quiet bedroom, dispelling the gentle dream in the warm bedroom. The desk lamp lit up almost as soon as the cell phone rang. Zhao Changjiang, who was in pajamas, took the cell phone and looked at the number. His originally vigilant and solemn face changed dramatically. It seemed that he was very scared. He answered the phone without hesitation and said in a deep voice, "Speaker." Because of his profession, he often received sudden calls in the middle of the night. It might be from the ministry, or it might be from some subordinates who were close to him, or it might be some serious case or something else. But he never thought that he would receive a call from his immediate superior at this time. The remaining sleepiness disappeared the moment he answered the phone. Zhao Changjiang, who was completely awake, had already reached out to find his clothes. "Old Li, come to my place for a short meeting." On the phone, the steady and graceful female voice laughed. "Am I disturbing your rest?" Zhao Changjiang's heart relaxed a little with the laughter on the phone. He also laughed. "I'm used to it. But I was really shocked when I received your call. There are some things that need to be dealt with urgently. Let's talk face to face later." The other party said lightly and then hung up the phone. Zhao Changjiang began to put on his clothes quickly. Just like when he suddenly heard the whistle for emergency assembly in the middle of the night in the army, he was serious, hurried, meticulous, and resolute. "What's wrong?" Beside Zhao Changjiang, the woman who was nearly 50 years old but still attractive asked a little lazily. She raised her hand to rub her eyes and complained, "What's wrong this time? There are really too many troubles in the local area. Tell me, when have you been free from worry in the past few years? You're so busy that you don't eat regularly. You're on tenterhooks even when you sleep. I'm almost suffering from a nervous breakdown because of you." The speaker called me personally and said that he wants to have an emergency meeting. Zhao Changjiang shook his head and said gently, "Go to sleep first. It's all right." "Cousin called you? At this time?" The woman's sleepiness and laziness faded away in an instant. She suddenly sat up in bed. "What happened?" "I'm not sure yet." Zhao Changjiang shook his head. He didn't say it in his heart, but he was almost certain that Speaker Bai, who had never made any big moves since he came to Liaodong, was going to do something big this time. The woman's expression was a little uncertain. Her name was Zhao Qing, a distant relative of the Bai family in Yuzhou. In terms of relationship, she should call Bai Qingqian cousin, but in fact, the blood relationship between them was very thin, the kind that could not be more distant. Although they were distant relatives, Zhao Qing had been very close to Bai Qingqian since they were young. Although they were relatives in name, they could be said to be best friends who could talk about anything. Zhao Changjiang and Zhao Qing were even married. They were all introduced by Bai Qingqian back then. At that time, Zhao Zhang was transferred from the southern station district to Liaodong. In addition to the fact that Bai Qingqian really needed a trusted confidant to be her right-hand man, Bai Qingqian also wanted to chat with her good friend for a long time. Zhao Changjiang was one of the 11 provincial council members of Liaodong province and the head of the Liaodong police department. It was no exaggeration to say that he was Bai Qingqian's right-hand man in Liaodong. Although Bai Qingqian came to Liaodong because of the cooperation between the two groups, she did not stand on ceremony when it came to consolidating her right to speak. For nearly 5 years, the overall level of Liaodong seemed to be extremely stable, but Bai Qingqian had long been in power. Her words carried enormous weight, and she quietly overshadowed the sharpness of the governor of Liaodong. The main reason was that she had grasped what she should control in her hands. The Ministry of Personnel, which controlled personnel, was the first thing she grasped, followed by the Ministry of Supervision, and then the propaganda system. Finally, she transferred Zhao Changjiang to control the police department, plus the chief steward of the provincial government, who was bound to keep pace with Bai Qingqian. After mastering 4 powerful departments, Bai Qingqian had already established an absolute advantage in Liaodong. In less than 5 years, Bai Qingqian was almost unshakable in Liaodong. There was no doubt that if she did not leave in this election, the whole Liaodong would be included in the territory of the giant group or the new group. This was undoubtedly what the academics absolutely did not want to see. This was one of their most core territories. As the election approached, the ups and downs of Bai Qingqian's sprint to the parliament made the whole Liaodong turbulent in recent days. All kinds of signs had appeared a few months ago. At this time, in the middle of the night, Bai Qingqian suddenly called for an emergency meeting. Zhao Changjiang could hardly imagine the content of this meeting. "You sleep first. I'm going. Zhao Changjiang looked at his wife on the bed, whose expression changed. He took a deep breath and went straight out of his room. He lived in the 6th building of the provincial government compound, not far from the 1st building where Bai Qingqian lived. Zhao Changjiang put on his coat and went out. It was cold in winter in Liaodong. The courtyard was silvery white and it was snowing heavily again. Zhao Changjiang stepped on the snowflakes and walked in the courtyard of the provincial government compound in the middle of the night. His eyes were firm. Many years ago he was injured in the Border Control Corps and transferred to the military headquarters. From the military headquarters, he entered the Southern Station District and then transferred from the military system to Liaodong. His style had never changed. He was calm, firm and fearless. After more than 4 years in Liaodong, Zhao Changjiang had already established his image as an iron-fisted person. Zhao Changjiang passed by the 4th building of the provincial government compound. The door of the detached villa in the 4th building was just opened. A slightly fat woman in her 50s just wrapped her coat tightly and came out. When she saw Zhao Changjiang, she was slightly stunned. Old Li? Zhao Changjiang was also a little surprised. The 1st building? Yes, boss. Bai summoned me in the middle of the night. I dare not neglect it. The middle-aged woman chuckled. Her figure was slightly plump and her face was round. In the midst of the falling snow, she looked somewhat benevolent. This was another trusted general of Bai Qingqian who had come from Qingzhou province. She followed Bai Qingqian all the way to Liaodong, the Iron Lady. When Bai Qingqian was the governor of Qingzhou, she served as the non-director deputy governor of Qingzhou. Now she was one of the 11 directors of Liaodong and in charge of the Ministry of Supervision. Compared with Zhao Changjiang, who was an iron-fisted person, Guan Yuan in the system of Liaodong was obviously more afraid of this seemingly amiable little old woman. Let's go together. Zhao Changjiang nodded. Yesterday, Ningning and Haoyang wandered outside for a day and had dinner here. The 2 children said that they wanted to travel abroad to see the world. Old Li Haoyang said that he didn't plan to take over your job in the future, nor did he want to be a policeman. After graduation he planned to do business. This trip abroad seems to be to investigate some project. What's your attitude? Yi Han, who was known as the Iron Lady in Liaodong, looked at Zhao Changjiang with a smile. Her daughter and Zhao Changjiang's son both went to school in Huading, and they were in the same school in the same year. The 2 children had been in love for 2 years and had a very good relationship. It was only a matter of time that the 2 families would get married. They often visited each other and their parents were also very supportive of them being together. That brat still hasn't told me about it. Looks like your mother-in-law found out first. Zhao Changjiang was a little stunned and his tone was a little unhappy. My old Han intends to give the 2 children a startup capital and even plans to send someone to accompany them abroad, but it depends on your attitude. Yi Han chuckled. Let them be. Zhao Changjiang shook his head. I don't care about this. You can discuss it with Zhao Qing. The 2 children will graduate this year, right? At this time next year, I'm afraid that you and I will not be in Liaodong. It may not be convenient to meet in the future. In my opinion, we should settle their relationship this year. Ningning is a good child. Once she enters my family, I promise I won't treat her badly. Okay. Yi Han's voice was very happy. My old Han also means the same. Ask the 2 children what they say. If there is no problem, try to let them get married after graduation. The 2 chatted casually, but their voices gradually lowered. In their sight, the 3rd and 7th buildings of the provincial government compound lit up one after another. Zhao Changjiang and Yi Han looked at each other and both of them were silent. Everyone knew what kind of people lived in the 3rd and 7th buildings of the provincial government compound. They could be said to be comrades who advanced and retreated with them. The one who lived in the 7th building controlled the propaganda system of Liaodong and was Bai Qingqian's college classmate. The one in the 3rd building controlled the Ministry of Personnel of Liaodong. He was transferred from Yuzhou at that time because the Bai family directly supported Bai Qingqian. Plus Zhao Changjiang and Yi Han. This was the perception of outsiders. Bai Qingqian was one of the 4 heavenly kings in Liaodong. In the middle of the night, Bai Qingqian actually informed the 4 of them at once. What did this mean? Liaodong. Yi Han sighed in a low voice. Is the most chaotic situation going to start in Liaodong this time? Chapter 12:15. The thick material turned to the last page. Under the soft light, Bai Qingqian put the material aside, picked up the teacup and took a sip of water. She looked calm. This material had been sent to her office a few months ago. At that time, Bai Qingqian read it over and over again several times. Finally, because she didn't make up her mind, she temporarily sealed it up. The material involved a series of events such as the corridor transformation project of the Liaodong provincial government, as well as a large number of illegal trade in Anong. The target was Tan Xiaotian, the current deputy speaker of Fengtian Academy. There were more than 100,000 words of a large number of reports. Obviously, it was not written by one person but from many aspects. The time span was as long as 5 years. Although there was no real name, a large number of reports were indeed true. To a certain extent, it could even be said that the evidence was conclusive. Even Bai Qingqian had an impression of many things mentioned in the material. This material appeared in her hands about 3 months ago. The source was still unknown. It was obvious that the election was coming. Because the election was coming, this was a spark sent to her by some people who wanted to fish in troubled waters. However, Bai Qingqian had never acted rashly. After reading the material in detail, she had already begun to let Yi Han's Ministry of Supervision take action secretly. Now she had also grasped a lot of breakthrough clues. Some of Tan Xiaoyan's practices had been arrogant to the point of brazen. The secret investigation of the Ministry of Supervision did not even encounter any even symbolic resistance. Some vague evidence had already appeared in the hands of the Ministry of Supervision. So 2 months ago, the provincial government personally issued a notice that Tan Xiaotian was sent to the Jianghu Academy in Liaodong to enter the advanced course. Then he began a half-year-long advanced course. When the news came out, there was no panic in Liaodong. Instead, there was jubilation. The Jianghu Academy in Zhongzhou State was the fundamental and important place of the academics. Its importance was even above that of Liaodong. There were quite a number of super heavyweights in the academics, including Li Huaqing, who had the background of the academy. Because of this, they were jokingly called the academics by the outside world. Specifically in Liaodong, the academy was obviously also a place where it was difficult for Bai Qingqian to influence. Tan Xiaotian had entered the academy's advanced class and not the training class. This was usually a sign that he was going to be promoted. In the past 2 years, the situation in Zhongzhou State seemed to be stable. But as the election got closer and closer, undercurrents were surging not only in Liaodong, but also in all provinces. When Bai Qingqian first entered Liaodong, she had already hurt the nerves of some people in Liaodong. In the past few years when she came to Liaodong, under this seemingly harmonious situation, there had been a lot of conflicts. Among them, Tan Xiaotian could be said to be a representative person. If Tan Xiaotian was transferred from the position of Deputy Speaker of Anong Province to the position of Deputy Speaker of Fengtian Provincial Government was Bai Qingqian's concession, then letting Tan Xiaotian enter the advanced course was undoubtedly Bai Qingqian's preparation for leaving Liaodong Province. In a sense, this seemed to be a sign that the academics had begun to exert their power and was ready to set things right in Liaodong. Tan Xiaotian entered the advanced class. Half a year later was basically very close to the time of the election. And the election in Liaodong Province might be before or after the election in Zhongzhou State. This time sequence determined whether Bai Qingqian could stay in Liaodong for a year or more than half a year. Therefore, now the academics in Liaodong were strongly supporting the election in Liaodong Province to be held before the election in Zhongzhou State. Tan Xiaotian entering the advanced class was a signal. When he returned from the academy and symbolically stayed in this position for a few days, it was very likely that he would be promoted from deputy speaker to one of the directors of Liaodong Province, the speaker of Fengtian Province, and become the new representative figure of the academy in Liaodong Province. This was undoubtedly the best choice. In recent decades, several speakers of Fengtian Province had directly ascended to the position of governor of Liaodong Province. Many people hoped that Tan Xiaotian could seize this clear line between heaven and earth. To say the least, even if he couldn't seize it, after the advanced class, Tan Xiaotian was likely to directly serve as the deputy governor of Liaodong Province, enter the council, and become the third person in the provincial government. This kind of rumor was getting clearer and clearer now. Obviously, the academics had begun to focus on the ecology of Liaodong Province after Bai Qingqian left. Bai Qingqian would be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State in this election. After he left Liaodong Province, the new speaker of Liaodong Province would also be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State under the influence of Bai Qingqian and the power support of the academics, and he would take charge of Liaodong Province. This person must be an important figure of the academics. In this way, the promotion channel of the academics was preliminarily perfected. As Bai Qingqian took the new post, the 4 supermasters under him would inevitably leave here one by one and go to different places. From the bottom of her heart, because the cooperation with the academics in recent years was quite pleasant, Bai Qingqian did not intend to make a big earthquake before she left. After all, she was still the speaker of Liaodong Province. She was responsible for anything that happened in Liaodong province. That was why she temporarily hung Tan Xiaotian up. After he left, she would hand this problem to her successor. The successor must be one of the leaders of the academics and would know how to deal with the internal affairs of Liaodong province in a low-key manner. This way, even if she left this place, she wouldn't lose too many points. However, it was obvious that her careful consideration to some extent was regarded as weakness by some people with ulterior motives in Liaodong. Therefore, these days the internal affairs of Liaodong became more and more unstable. Bai Qingqian was still hesitating. But the matter of the third supervisory group entering Jianghu directly stimulated Bai Qingqian to make up her mind completely. The other party had already begun to take action against the new group and Li Tianlan. Bai Qingqian naturally would not be polite. She had a card in her hand and did not bother to wait for the signal from Yuzhou from Bai Zhanfeng and Zhou Mulin. At this moment, before leaving the academics, she just wanted to lift this shameful cover and see how much shocking darkness was brewing inside. Now that she had shed all pretense of cordiality, Bai Qingqian did not mind giving everyone in the academics a hard slap in the face. Bai Qingqian took another sip of tea, and her eyes became more indifferent and determined. Speaker Minister Yi is here. The secretary knocked lightly on the door, walked in and whispered, "Invite her in." Bai Qingqian nodded. Yi Han, who was slightly fat, came over and said with a smile, "Those guys are still outside. They said they wanted to smoke before coming in." Bai Qingqian nodded and asked directly, "Can we do it directly about Tan Xiaotian's problem?" Yi Han's face changed slightly. Obviously, she did not expect Bai Qingqian to be so direct. She hesitated and whispered, "Are you sure? If we can do it, let's do it." Bai Qingqian waved her hand lightly. "When Changjiang and the others come in, we will discuss the result together. It's time for some people to wake up." Yi Han took a deep breath and did not speak. Bai Qingqian held the teacup with a calm face. She thought of the leader and deputy leader of the third supervisory group. She thought of what they would do after entering Jianghu. Bai Qingqian gently raised the corner of her mouth. She was calm and confident, with indescribable grace. She did not have so many thoughts. She had only one thought now. Who dared to make life difficult for her son? She would let them die a horrible death. Chapter 12:16. Li Huaqing didn't see Li Guangtu in the end. He didn't even know Li Guangtu's current state from Li Tianlan. He just knew that Li Guangtu was still alive. Angry? Annoyed? Resentful? More or less, these emotions existed in his heart, but more than that, it was a kind of calmness that was expected. Before coming to Emperor Dong's palace, he had expected the current situation, so he was not surprised. If Li Tianlan was really so easy to talk to, the whole Zhongzhou state would not be in a sensitive state of anxiety now. Obviously, this matter could not be solved in a day or two. In the end, it still depended on fists and strength. Dongqing Wudi guessed that Li Huaqing came here in such a hurry because he had a trump card. Not only Dongqing Wudi, because everyone else, based on their understanding of Li Huaqing, felt that he had a trump card. In the past 10 years, Li Huaqing had been gentle and occasionally strong. But no matter what he did, he would not make things unmanageable in the end. His steadiness made the whole Zhongzhou state trust him for 10 years, and this time seemed to be no exception. Li Huaqing did have a trump card. It was the kind of trump card that could immediately reach an agreement with Li Tianlan and could definitely make Li Tianlan compromise and let him go. With this trump card, he was 100% sure that he could persuade Li Tianlan. Even without persuasion, Li Tianlan could compromise. But that was not the way to play cards. If the so-called negotiation was destined to be unconditionally compromised all the time, it was not a negotiation but a plunder. There was more than one way to get Li Guangtu back. If the hard way didn't work, he could use the soft way. Li Huaqing fully believed that as long as he unconditionally compromised, satisfied Li Tianlan's demand, and allowed Emperor Dong's palace to plunder a considerable part of the various resources of Zhongzhou state, he could take Li Guangtu away at any time. But Zhongzhou state was not a logistics base that could be plundered by Li Tianlan. Negotiation, game, dispute, confrontation. Li Huaqing had to take him away. But before letting Li Tianlan see his trump card, Li Huaqing had to let Li Tianlan see his own strength first. This was the case on any occasion. Only when one side showed their strength first could they be qualified to talk on equal terms. He had to let Li Tianlan realize that the attitude of Zhongzhou state was not inferior. Zhongzhou state could give benefits to Emperor Dong's palace, but it could also completely destroy the system of Emperor Dong's palace. Perhaps Li Tianlan knew this. But being able to do it and daring to do it were two completely different things. What Li Huaqing wanted to show was the power that could destroy Emperor Dong's palace at any time. To put it simply, he wanted to show off a few of his abilities. After that, when the situation became stable again, Li Tianlan might become more mature in reflection. This was a battle of attrition. It was a battle and game between Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing. The focus of the game was Li Guangtu. The bargaining chips were the resources of Emperor Dong's palace and the academics. As the election approached, a storm was brewing. Li Huaqing, who was confirmed to be re-elected, and the entire academics should have been the most quiet group, but now the academics had become the first group to jump out. For Li Guangtu? Li Huaqing didn't think so. He was indeed the focus of the dispute between him and Emperor Dong's palace. But whether it was to protect Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, or to accept Jiang Shangyu, Li Huaqing was very clear-headed from beginning to end. He had only one goal. Not for Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, and Jiang Shangyu. It was for Li Tianlan. Just for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was very polite to him, but also very impolite. The direct result of the disagreement was that Li Tianlan directly left. He was really leaving. Li Huaqing didn't even see Li Tianlan leave. After saying those harsh words, Li Tianlan just turned around and disappeared from his sight. The president, who was left alone in Emperor Dong's palace, stood alone and smoked a cigarette. Then he saw Xiao Mahai, who was now the chief butler of Emperor Dong's palace, walking over with a smile. They didn't talk about the old days. They were not familiar with each other. The general, who had blatantly embezzled tens of millions of prison funds in the past 2 years, had formally submitted his resignation a month ago. Li Huaqing also signed the resignation letter. Someone had taken over Xiao Mahai's position as the director of Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Mahai, who had left the desert, went to Tianan and became the director of Emperor Dong's palace. He seemed to be living a good life. Xiao Mahai arranged for Li Huaqing to stay in a villa in the central area of Emperor Dong's palace. The villa complex, which would probably be provided for the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace in the future, had just been completed. There was still a slight smell in the villa, but the decoration was absolutely comfortable and luxurious. Xiao Mahai arranged for people to prepare a sumptuous meal for breakfast or supper at this time. He even opened a bottle of wine and then left. Li Huaqing, who was not sleepy at all, sank his body into the soft leather sofa and slowly tasted the wine. He was not sleepy at all. He was a little excited inside. It was like the moment when he was about to draw the sword before the decisive battle. He was completely focused, energetic, and highly focused. All the fatigue was completely suppressed and disappeared without a trace. Li Huaqing seemed to have completely entered the fighting state. He had already made sufficient mental preparations for this game. It could be victory, failure, or inevitable losses. All of these were within the range of what he could accept. He held the power in his hand, and this power had completely locked on the target. He could not hesitate, and must completely vent it out. He just didn't know if Li Tianlan had already made the same preparation. Li Huaqing held the wine glass and looked at the deep night outside the window, like a peerless swordsman holding a famous sword, waiting for the dawn. Li Tianlan did not rest either. He returned to the top floor of the castle where only he lived. In the spacious and luxurious living room, the maid Mai Shiranui, who came from East Island with all kinds of thoughts, had not left yet. She sat quietly on the sofa and was in a daze. She had changed out of her sexy and revealing clothes. She was wearing a pure white exquisite dress, black stockings, and a pair of seductive red stilettos. She sat quietly in the spotless living room. Her legs, which were shimmering in black stockings, were crossed. She was elegant and quiet. Rather than a maid, she was more like a well-dressed imperial concubine waiting for the arrival of the emperor, or a princess looking forward to the arrival of her lover. She seemed to be thinking about something, so she did not come to her senses when Li Tianlan suddenly appeared in the room. She was thinking about her life and the future. Mai Shiranui had never denied her desire for power. This desire included many things such as the fanatical worship of real power, the power to dominate the dark world, the power to rule the world and sweep everything, and so on. She had always had a goal in her life. When many so-called young talents in the dark world of East Island worshipped her as a goddess, those people never existed in her eyes. At the beginning, her master Shinichi Miyamoto, the supreme ninja of the invincible realm who supported Liuhua Palace and made it as famous as Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School, was incomparably lofty in her heart. At that time, the only thing Mai Shiranui wanted was to inherit everything from her master and lead Liuhua Palace to surpass Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace to become a super force in the dark world. After Shinichi Miyamoto died in the hands of tribulation, her target became Li Kuangtu. The Purgatory of Heaven capital appeared in East Island. At that time, the man with the code name God, holding a death scythe, was quiet and almost invisible most of the time, but he could fight tit for tat with Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong without falling behind. He indeed had the glory that shone on the whole dark world. Mai Shiranui didn't want to admit it, but she knew very well that in the most glorious years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island, she had many sleepless nights because of Li Kuangtu. His almost desperate power became something she was crazy about and also the driving force for her continuous progress. She longed to be conquered by such a man and to be owned by such a man. Appearance? None of these things mattered to her. When she tossed and turned countless nights, she could even disdain the pursuit of the royal crown prince. At that time, there was only the incomparable power in her eyes. She dreamed of becoming Li Kuangtu's woman, sleeping beside him, wearing Li Kuangtu's invincible aura, and enjoying the awe of the whole dark world. Mai Shiranui could see that Li Kuangtu was tempted by her. Many times she could feel the rising temperature in Li Kuangtu's eyes. However, whether it was the royal prince who accompanied Li Kuangtu or Phoenix of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, they all regarded her as a great threat and guarded her so tightly that there was no suitable opportunity. Li Kuangtu was indeed lustful, but he was not the kind of person who was desperate. If he didn't have the chance to eat her, he wouldn't force her. That was the most glorious years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Now it seemed that it was also the peak period of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. After the chaos in Snow Country, the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to fall from the peak at a speed that no one expected. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough completely suppressed the powerful aura on Li Kuangtu. The Purgatory of Heaven capital left East Island. Countless forces in the dark world were withering. Emperor Dong's palace rose strongly. During that time, Mai Shiranui was lost and confused. The support for the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the account to East Island pressed her hard at that time. She didn't know who to rely on and completely lost her goal. Until the end, she found that she could only rely on her own strength. Soliuhua Palace quietly cut off the relationship with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The invincible image of Li Kuangtu that was once deeply rooted in her heart had collapsed. So when she did this, she found that she actually had no burden in her heart. She drew a clear line with the Purgatory of Heaven capital and even quietly swallowed a lot of the benefits that belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. She benefited from both the Purgatory of Heaven capital and East Island. Liuhua Palace was getting stronger and stronger, and her personal strength was constantly breaking through. She thought that she had seen the future that she once looked forward to approaching, and she saw the light of hope coming from a distant place. Then the shadow that spread from Jianghu state quietly spread to East Island. There was no sign. It was natural, like the sun rising and the moon setting. The world was supposed to be like this. The shadow spread in Jianghu state. It was dark and silent, but it emitted a pretentious light. It shrouded East Island and quickly shrouded the entire dark world. It was no longer the era of Sword Emperor and deity. Under the shadow that shrouded the dark world was the absolutely invincible light of East Emperor. It was cold, majestic, awe-inspiring, deep, and immovable like a mountain. It was a shadow that completely made the entire East Island feel completely desperate. But Mai Shiranui actually found that she didn't feel the least bit unwilling in her heart. The kind of almost fanatical worship and admiration for Li Kuangtu was like magma that had cooled down and erupted again, from the depths of her heart in an even more unstoppable manner. Mai Shiranui would eventually remember the first confrontation and meeting between her and Li Tianlan in East Island a few years ago. At that time, she, who was proud and arrogant, never thought that one day she would be so eager to be conquered and even ravaged by that man. She was the goddess in the hearts of many people in East Island, and she was a powerhouse in the hearts of many people in the dark world. Women in the dark world never meant that they were weak because no matter which era, there were women standing at the peak who showed the demeanor of women. More than 20 years ago, there was Summer Solstice and Li Shi, two powerhouses who could be regarded as the peak combat power in the dark world. There was Bai Qingqian, a powerful figure who had begun to strive for the parliament. There was the female Prime Minister of England, and there was Rothschild King Tong who controlled the Shadow Throne. In the era before Li Tianlan, there was the silent but thunderous Samsara Palace Master who supported the entire Samsara Palace. There was Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state who guarded Mount Taibai alone but radiated sharpness. There was the Holy Virgin Angel who controlled great power in the Holy Land. So the dark world was never lonely. It was the world of men, but women also had a bright sharpness that couldn't be ignored. In this era there was Qin Weibai, the patriarch of the Lin clan, who had faded away and stayed with Qin Weibai but no one dared to ignore. There was Dongqing Qiuqi, who had now ascended to the high position of governor in Jianghu. There was Bai Yu, the genius of Jade Pool, who had begun to touch the threshold of the invincible realm. There was Mai Shiranui, who supported Liuhua Palace alone in East Island. There were many others. Mai Shiranui was not the most dazzling among these people, but her sharpness couldn't be ignored. Many people thought that Mai Shiranui would also become a dazzling figure who stood at the peak of the dark world and represented all the women of this era in the future. She was indifferent, arrogant, holy, noble, inviolable, and inviolable. People could only look at her from afar, admire her from the bottom of their hearts, and dream about her. This was the view of countless people in East Island about Mai Shiranui. But Mai Shiranui felt that she was a bitch. She had a beautiful appearance, excellent talent, and an extraordinary identity, but she was also a bitch with a strong servility. This was not to belittle herself, but her self-awareness that was difficult for others to talk about. From Li Kuangtu to Li Tianlan. She couldn't resist that kind of power. This year she was 26 years old. She couldn't be said to be young, but she was definitely not old either. Her body was still delicate, no longer immature, and there was a trace of maturity. She was an age that became more attractive in everyone's eyes. Under Dong Huang's shadow, she longed to get Li Tianlan's approval, to be conquered by Li Tianlan, to pull her over, to kneel at his feet, and to press her proud and beautiful head to accept something. She longed for Li Tianlan to throw her on the bed and tear her expensive clothes into pieces. She longed for Li Tianlan to crash and ravage her like a beast and eat her up bit by bit in her screams. There would even be whips, candles, or other things she had seen in East Island that she didn't care about before but secretly looked forward to when they were on Li Tianlan. She longed for Li Tianlan to use everything she had under her goddess halo and enjoy her most docile and charming side. Her charm wanted to bloom around Li Tianlan. That might be a kind of light that blended with Li Tianlan's light. She would wear the dazzling light of Dong Huang and announce to the whole dark world that she was Dong Huang's woman and enjoy the awe of the whole dark world. As long as she thought about it, it was a kind of pleasure that made her almost breathless. But Li Tianlan didn't say yes. He refused her request to be his woman, but he told himself that he needed a personal maid. The goddess in the hearts of East Island people. The maid of Dong Huang. Mai Shiranui even thought it was very interesting, so she came to Emperor Dong's palace and even carefully prepared a lot of things. Mai Shiranui would never forget the strange expression on Xiao Mahai's face when he checked her luggage and found something like a whip in her suitcase. There were even some inconspicuous but interesting gadgets that could only be bought in East Island. Mai Shiranui didn't care. At that time, she burst into an extremely charming smile in front of Xiao Mahai and said that His Majesty Dong Huang asked her to bring it with him. There was no look of contempt in his eyes. She could even see a touch of pure awe and flattery in Xiao Mahai's eyes at that time. That feeling made Mai Shiranui's legs weak and her eyes a little misty. She was very sure that this was what she wanted. She knew that she could not break the limit of the invincible realm and enter the realm that she had never reached before. But she could lie docilely beside Li Tianlan, and the whole dark world would also fear and flatter her. Her Liuhua Palace could also become a superpower, even if she was not in the invincible realm, even if she was just an ordinary person who didn't know martial arts. Mai Shiranui thought quietly. Her face was a little flushed and she rubbed her legs unconsciously, feeling that she was going to take a bath again. What are you thinking about? Li Tianlan's voice suddenly rang out in the brightly lit living room. Mai Shiranui's whole body shook. She didn't get up at first but unconsciously made a sound like a cat's meow, soft, delicate, mellow and sentimental. The blue veins on Li Tianlan's forehead jumped for no reason, and a nefarious fire almost uncontrollably rose from his abdomen. Your Majesty. Mai Shiranui stood up with a flushed face, a little cramped and a little flustered. A very subtle smell spread on her body. Li Tianlan glanced at her and asked directly, "Where is your room?" Mai Shiranui froze for a moment as if she couldn't believe it, but with some expectation she said softly, "It's next to yours. I cleaned it up myself. Your Majesty, would you like to have a look?" Li Tianlan waved his hand and said, "Now, go and have a rest. I'll call you if I need anything." Mai Shiranui stood where she was, stunned for a moment, then gave a soft, "Oh," and turned to leave. Li Tianlan glanced at her unconsciously, only to find that Mai Shiranui's delicate white dress swayed gently as she walked, and a small wet mark was gradually growing. He frowned and didn't think much about it. He asked casually, "What's the situation in East Island now?" East Island was undoubtedly the priority at the moment. With Mai Shiranui a chess piece, there shouldn't be too much trouble. My Shiranui paused and turned around. Her watery eyes became more and more hazy and she said in a soft voice, "It's chaotic and they're scared." Li Tianlan nodded thoughtfully. Mai Shiranui stared at him for a while, then turned around in disappointment and walked back to her room. The door of the room was gently closed and then opened again, leaving a very clear gap. After a while, the tempting pink light peeked out from the gap. Li Tianlan suddenly smiled and his smile was a little happy. He suddenly thought of Li Huaqing. He could probably understand some of Li Huaqing's thoughts. Li Huaqing began to show his own power. And he came to Tiannan probably because he was afraid that Li Tianlan would do the most extreme thing, which was also the reaction he least wanted to see. It was really a wonderful move. The domestic war was tit for tat. Did he think he could control the situation just by looking at him here? At this time, if he left Xinyuan City, Li Tianlan suddenly wanted to see Li Huaqing's reaction. Chapter 12-17. When military counselor called him, Li Tianlan was about to finish watching a classic Hollywood action blockbuster. The movie had come to the end. The overwhelming wreckage of machinery was flying in the fire, and the soldiers with shields were fighting fiercely with the muscular giants. In the distance was a ruined city, and the survivors were running for their lives. All kinds of high-tech weapons were in scrupulously blooming destructive flames in the air, and the endless legions were moving forward firmly in the surging artillery fire. One picture after another was reflected in his dull pupils. He sat quietly like a puppet, with countless thoughts flashing in his mind about East Island, about South America, about Europe. The urgent reorganization of the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace, the establishment of various departments, the blueprint of the new group, the game with Li Huaqing, the various investments of the Flourishing Age Fund, the future of Tiannan, his future. Everything seemed to explode at once. Everything had to be done, and they had to be done as soon as possible. He didn't pay attention to what the movie was about. It was destined to be a blockbuster without too many connotations. The scenes were gorgeous and hot-blooded, and the special effects were all on. Li Tianlan's thoughts were scattered with the special effects on the screen. He looked quieter and quieter, sitting on the sofa motionlessly. Time was silent and so was he. Gradually he was so quiet as if he didn't exist at all. The phone rang. Li Tianlan's body moved slightly. He seemed to come alive all of a sudden. He exhaled softly, turned off the TV in front of him, picked up the phone and said, Your Majesty, Yuzhou is a little lively." Military counselor's voice was still calm, and he came straight to the point. He used the word lively very vividly. In fact, Yuzhou was more than lively now. Li Guangtu suddenly came to Emperor Dong's palace. Such an abrupt move directly shocked the whole Jianghu state, and Yuzhou was now in a state of complete uproar. The parliament had not yet held a meeting to formally announce or issue any orders. But all kinds of heavyweights had begun to meet frequently. Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfang were secretly meeting. According to the exact news, an hour ago Wu Jingmin, the deputy minister of the cabinet, also arrived at the Bai family's manor. Bai Qingzhao went to the building of the military department overnight. It was said that among the four spirits of Jianghu state, besides Li Wangxing, the black tortoise who was stationed in Tiannan, azure dragon, white tiger, and the new vermilion bird had all received orders to return to Yuzhou with their terracotta soldiers. Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyun, and Yi Dongxing had also started secretly contacting each other an hour ago. Guo Wentian seemed ready to leave for Southwest City. The speaker of the North City arrived at Yuzhou province overnight and entered Zhou Yunhai's home. Not only the parliament but also some powerful figures in Jianghu state had received the news and began to discuss the possible changes. Hua Xingyang's phone was ringing off the hook. Countless powerful people expressed their opinions one after another. Some hoped that Li Huaqing could be more cautious, and some hoped that Xinyuan City could take a step back. As the current CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, the military counselor also received calls from different people. Some wanted to strengthen cooperation, while others wanted to shelve previous cooperation plans. It was a complete mess. Demons danced in a frenzy. The turbulence had begun to spread to the entire Jianghu state from Yuzhou as the center. In 24 hours at most, the roaring hurricane would sweep across the entire Jianghu state. Is it exciting? Li Tianlan asked with a smile and a relaxed tone while holding the phone. Military counselor was silent for about half a minute. Obviously, he did not expect Li Tianlan's attitude to be like this at this time. Then he laughed and said, "I've experienced such a battle once and I'm used to it. Your Majesty, the timing is a bit sensitive now, you know." Of course, Li Tianlan could understand what the so-called timing sensitivity meant. The problem of Li Guangtu had now become the focus between the academics and Emperor Dong's palace. Neither side would give in. Li Huaqing's arrival in Emperor Dong's palace made everyone a little uneasy. But before the situation changed, the uneasiness was just uneasiness. They would wait and see, look for opportunities and express their attitudes at the right time. The so-called right time was undoubtedly when the confrontation between the academics and Emperor Dong's palace had a clear winner. But now there was a big movement in Yuzhou. It was no longer as simple as waiting and seeing. The academics and Emperor Dong's palace had stirred up chaos. Now, all the other groups and wealthy families were obviously ready to take action and showed signs of entering the fray. There might be a lot of reasons. But there should be only a few of them who really wanted to help the academics or Emperor Dong's palace. The most important reason was because of the election. The eve of every election in Jianghu state was the most lively time. The situation seemed calm, but only the people in the game could really see the stormy waves. When it came to the group, every group had their own demands and wanted to complete their own layout. When it came to individuals, everyone also had their own goals. The relationship between each other, the competition inside and outside the group, and the cooperation in various fields were a complete mess. Everyone was fighting for a certain position for a certain side's benefits. From top to bottom, the fighting was endless, spreading to every domain, every group. It was a chaotic battle. Of course, the negotiation had to be negotiated. But just like Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan now, before the negotiation, both sides wanted to show their strength. Only with great strength could their words be taken seriously, respected, and even accepted. There was less than a year before the election. Undoubtedly, the major groups also wanted to show their strength. Only then would they have more bargaining chips and be able to ask for more things. Is it going to start now? Li Tianlan smiled and looked out of the window at the night that seemed to be gradually fading away. Shenyuan City in winter was still as warm as spring, but his body still remembered the coldness that pervaded Yuzhou. He narrowed his eyes and shook his head, saying, "It's not the new year yet. It seems a little early. Because a lot of things need to be redistributed. Our appearance has impacted the structure of the six, and many people have long been unable to hold back." Military counselor's voice was a little understated. "So in your opinion, is it a good thing or a bad thing for Emperor Dong's palace this time?" "Neither good nor bad." The military counselor laughed. "Everyone who enters the game has good intentions, but no one knows what kind of accident will happen until the end. We can only do what we should do. No matter if it's good or bad, we still need to operate." Li Tianlan's voice was more understated, even a little careless. "Well, what can you do?" Military counselor didn't speak for a while. He didn't know whether to give Li Tianlan a thumbs up or a middle finger in his heart. Li Tianlan's words, whether in an understated tone or a careless tone, were the essence of the boss. Li Tianlan's casual words obviously meant that the next task would be handed over to him. However, as the CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, it seemed to be his task indeed. This sentence was undoubtedly Li Tianlan's statement, which meant that military counselor could use all the resources that Emperor Dong's palace currently had to obtain greater benefits for Emperor Dong's palace in the next chaotic battle. As the supreme leader of Emperor Dong's palace, if Li Tianlan bowed to everything personally, the existence of military counselor and others would undoubtedly be meaningless. Li Tianlan was self-aware. He had indeed come to this position, but in terms of skill, layout, power, experience, he was not able to perfectly control all the internal details of a group. At the very least, he was not as good as military counselor in this respect. He just knew what he wanted and where Emperor Dong's palace would be next. This kind of thing involved the main strategic direction, but not the specific operation process, and Li Tianlan was competent. The goal of the new group after the election was very clear. In the case of keeping Jianghu, they would take down the 4 provinces of Nanyue, Xie, Dongshan, and Jiangnan. In the case of perfecting the internal promotion system of the group, they would try their best to conquer the cabinet and occupy a relatively strong position. With the 5 provinces and Tiannan as the foundation, the radiating influence and the power of the cabinet would support each other. In the overall strategy of the whole Jianghu state, resources would be inclined to Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent, and it would protect the integration of the new group, the giant group, and the north group. This was the strategic direction of Emperor Dong's palace in Jianghu state in the next 10 years that Li Tianlan had personally formulated. The next implementation, the allocation of a large number of resources, and the operation of human relations were the responsibility of the CEO military counselor. Li Tianlan gave the direction to lead Emperor Dong's palace. He didn't care about the process, only the final result. "I'm on my way to the Bai family manor. On the phone, military counselor smiled gently. He was the CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, but after all he had nothing to do with the parliament of Jianghu state. On the surface he was just a businessman. At this time he naturally had to unite all the forces that could be united to intervene in this chaotic battle. Dongqing Wudi was still in Emperor Dong's palace. At present, Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfeng represented the giant group in Yuzhou, and Wu Jingmin represented the power of the new group. Military counselor represented Emperor Dong's palace. Only when he, the CEO, was present could the power of the new group and the giant group operate smoothly and prepare for the next chaotic battle. The first thing we have to face is the academy. Military counselor's voice was very quiet and calm. In the chaos, his slow voice had a kind of reassuring and trustworthy power. Your Majesty, what are you going to do about Li Kuangtu? Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. Do we fight to the end? Or can we compromise? I can operate in Yuzhou, but first we have to be mentally prepared. Your decision means different results. The current situation is that our conflict with the academies has caused the current chaos. This is not a good thing, but it is not a bad thing either. At least to a certain extent, it shows that the initiative is in our hands, not in the hands of the academies. If we fight to the end, the first thing we have to face is the full attack of the academies. In this position, Li Huaqing can't be ignored. Once we fall into a disadvantageous position, other forces who don't want the new group to appear will undoubtedly attack us together. It's hard for us to resist, but once we do, our gains will be far beyond expectations. It's risky to fight to the end, but the benefits are also great. If we compromise, we can make full use of the initiative in our hands. When to compromise and when to hand Li Kuangtu over to the parliament, these are completely up to us. We can even use this to exchange something with the academies. Before the election, our preparation will be more leisurely. At present, compromise is a relatively rational choice. It's less risky and very safe. Military counselor's voice was clear and definite. So you prefer me to let him go? Li Tianlan asked. Military counselor seemed to think about the emotion in Li Tianlan's tone and finally said cautiously, "Everything is up to your Majesty. I'm in charge." Ha! Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and didn't speak for a while. He was indeed hesitant about how to deal with Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu's hostility to him was extremely obvious, but perhaps it was because of some fixed but later broken understanding of Li Kuangtu since childhood, or because of Dongqing Rushi, or because of the sword Li Kuangtu lent him in Reki City. It was because of the sword that Li Kuangtu had lent him in Reki City, or something else that he couldn't tell himself. Therefore, even though Li Tianlan now had the strength above Li Kuangtu, he didn't want to kill him very much. Jiang Shangyu might have also seen this. So he forcibly took Gu Xingyun away and left Li Kuangtu. At that time, Li Tianlan could have killed Li Kuangtu countless times in an instant, but in the end he chose to take him back to Emperor Dong's palace. From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, keeping Li Kuangtu here and waiting for the situation to stabilize, Li Tianlan could already get up and go to Heaven Capital in Tiannan and use Li Kuangtu as a bargaining chip to take over the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital. There was a saying in ancient times that one could order the vassals by holding the emperor by force. It was not accurate to use it here. Li Kuangtu was not the emperor, but the meaning was not much different. As long as he controlled Li Kuangtu, taking over the purgatory of Heaven Capital would be a matter of time. Those who were inclined to him no longer had to hesitate and would willingly join Emperor Dong's palace. Even those who were loyal to Li Kuangtu, such as Dawn, Daybreak and Phoenix, would join because Li Kuangtu was under the control of Emperor Dong's palace and become the sword of Emperor Dong's palace. Situ Tsangyue's occasional trance would not appear again. The relationship between Sai City and Mount Shu would gradually ease. Li Shi didn't have to recall the past. Keeping Li Kuangtu would be an explanation to Dongqing Rushi, her grandfather, and the Li family. As long as Emperor Dong controlled Li Kuangtu, Emperor Dong's palace could get a lot of things. From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, the parliament would also give him generous compensation if he handed over Li Kuangtu. Dongqing Wudi brought Li Huaqing's bargaining chip. In the communication with Li Huaqing not long ago, he also explained it calmly. Beijiang was undoubtedly a piece of fat meat. But Li Huaqing didn't mean to exchange the position of the cabinet. In principle, he still supported Bai Qingqian to go to the cabinet. He could also support Wu Jingmin to serve as a director and deputy prime minister. He would also support Zhou Yuanshan to go to Nanyue. Li Huaqing's original intention was to promote Wu Jingmin's first secretary Jiang Kong, who was now in Jianghu and had a very pleasant cooperation with Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi, to the parliament of Zhongzhou state and let him take charge of Beijiang. Jianghu's qualifications were undoubtedly insufficient. Even among dozens of provincial speakers in Jianghu state, his qualifications were the least, but his ability was beyond doubt. If Beijiang was handed over to Jianghu, Li Tianlan would rest assured, and Jianghu state would also rest assured. The strategic significance of Beijiang was far more than just a member of parliament. That was the largest province in Jianghu state. It could be said to be vast and resourceful, but it could also be said to be sparsely populated. There were too many things that could be done in that land no matter what could be said or not. If the new group took over Beijiang after the election, they would undoubtedly become one of the top groups in Jianghu state. And not only the new group, but also Li Huaqing's concession to the Border Control Corps also meant that as long as Li Tianlan handed over Li Guangtu, the giant group could also get great benefits. This was the condition that Li Huaqing put forward. And it was certain that this was not all the conditions, but the most tempting one. As long as Li Tianlan was willing to talk about other details, there was absolutely room for discussion. Therefore, in the so-called overall situation of Emperor Dong's palace, it was beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace whether to release him or not. The difference was that if he didn't release him, he would get the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but he would have to resist the pressure from the parliament of Jianghu state. And if he released him, he would get a large number of bargaining chips headed by Beijiang, but in the future he would have to face the joint forces of Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shanyu. Li Tianlan was not afraid of making enemies. He was not even afraid that Li Guangtu would enter the supreme realm in the spiritual domain first. He just didn't want to be enemies with Li Guangtu and the Purgatory of Heaven capital represented by Li Guangtu. The brand of the Li family on the Purgatory of Heaven capital was so obvious. It could be said that he was indecisive, soft-hearted, or hesitant. Li Tianlan really didn't want to fight against them. That was tantamount to cutting off the beliefs he had grown up with, distorting his life and making the future more meaningless. And Li Huaqing and the parliament of Jianghu state were now undoubtedly forcing him and the Li family represented by Li Guangtu to go against each other. Li Tianlan held the phone and said after a while, "Let's wait and see. Things have to be done first. Don't be too anxious." Military counselors smiled on the other end of the phone. Now both sides are still at the stage of showing their strength. The second before the real showdown is the time for your majesty to consider. Li Tianlan said, I probably know what Li Huaqing wants to do. Military counselor continued, our intelligence department has received the news. Li Huaqing should want to re-establish the order of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. He has talked with Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shanyu. Li Guangtu is also an indispensable part of his plan. In Li Huaqing's expectation in the future, the special warfare system of Jianghu state will set up several new corps as the core pillars of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. Kunlun Corps, Commander Gu Xingyun, the main force is the current elite of Kunlun City. Heaven Capital Corps, Commander Li Guangtu, the main force is the current elite of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The third one, the source of the news, is a little vague. It should be called the Shadow Legion, Commander Jiang Shanyu, the specific composition of the personnel is unknown. In addition, there is the Snowdance Corps and the Nightmare Corps of Emperor Dong's palace, led by your majesty. It seems that the parliament will also give the special warfare system more power to speak. In short, Li Huaqing is very generous and it can be seen that he is very sincere. Military counselor's quiet and deep voice kept echoing. Li Tianlan held the phone and did not speak for a long time. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.